to roll back many restrictions. Tonight, you'll see a full house in the congressional chamber, some high-profile guests, and nearly no masks. While the president speaks, Ukraine citizens continue their fight against the Russian military to defend their homeland of Ukraine. Some say this commander-in-chief is not doing enough, that sanctions are not enough, but President Biden cannot send troops in without congressional support. Meanwhile, at home, prices are growing and growing at the gas pump as well as on store shelves. The commander-in-chief will have to address inflation in his remarks this evening and in his administration, or he will be forced to face it at the polls. Midterm elections are looming over all of this tonight out of D.C., and the president's party does not really have a lot to show right now. Democrats face a lot of resistance, not just from Republicans, but even from members of their own party. And we will see that in a whole new way this evening when, in addition to the traditional Republican response to the State of the Union, progressive Democrats also will stage a response to the president's speech tonight. Thanks to the U.S. Constitution, the president must address Congress and the American people. He will say, "Our union is strong. My fellow Americans, our union is strong." But it's fair to question how strong. He will say we are defeating COVID. But what does post-pandemic America even look like at this point? He will say progress is coming. But when? And in just about 1 hour, we might begin to get a few of those answers. And I want to bring in my co-host and longtime, very good friend, Baker Machado, who is standing by for us at Cheddar HQ in New York. Baker, what a privilege to do this with you yet again here this evening, my friends. Many things here to follow in terms of storylines. Baker, what do you have your eye on tonight?
Great to see you, as always, JD Durkin. Yes, another State of the Union for you and I to do here at Cheddar News. This, no doubt, JD, a huge moment for President Biden, a moment traditionally that presidents deliver hope to the American people during these big speeches. But as you mentioned, this president is dealing with a myriad of issues that have sunk his approval numbers, and that is leaving Americans exasperated with the direction of this country right now. The events in Ukraine, no doubt, overshadow this speech tonight. But my big question, JD, how much does President Biden talk about the conflict in Ukraine tonight? Now, Politico is reporting much of the president's address tonight had to be rewritten, all to address the situation in Ukraine. In the excerpt so far that we have seen of the president's speech tonight, he's going to say that Vladimir Putin needs to pay a price for his aggression and that the U.S. and the NATO allies were ready for him. But what comes next, especially if the war continues to escalate? Also, President Biden, JD, did speak for 30 minutes earlier today with President Zelensky of Ukraine. So will President Biden address tonight what the two leaders spoke about here? Now, we've also heard that the president will address criticism that he has not been tough enough on Vladimir Putin. He's going to talk about the united front that NATO so far has taken, as well as the sanctions that have been implemented, and that he's going to infer potentially more sanctions might be coming on, depending on what Vladimir Putin does here. But the president is also expected to say tonight, JD, that the U.S. will close its airspace to Russian aircraft. No doubt that is going to be huge. Regarding the economy, this administration, in terms of the officials, are saying that the Biden administration will spotlight improvements so far in the economy. Joe Biden's going to highlight GDP growth and historic low unemployment numbers, but also stress that so much more needs to be done to bring down costs. He's also going to have to address inflation tonight, JD, which has hurt every American family. And President Biden has to reassure the country that things will get better. Biden, in his speech tonight, will have to say a lot about how we're going to be building more in this country, which will hopefully lower the burdens when it comes to supply chain issues. The president also has to address where we're at right now with COVID, with mask mandates dropping. Is the president ready for us finally to declare our independence from the virus as he had hoped back in July, and that we're finally ready to have our lives back? And finally, one last thing here, JD. Does President Biden even address the Build Back Better momentum here? Joe Manchin, in the key vote in all of this, said that the massive spending bill is dead right now in the water. So does President Biden talk about splitting maybe some of those popular provisions and just try to pass anything? Because right now, Democrats do not have a lot of legislative achievements to look forward to so far this year. JD, the president's coming in, as you mentioned, with record low approval numbers, and those close to the president hope that this speech will be the reset button that he needs ahead of those midterms that are just 252 days away. Right now, a lot of hope right now in President Biden's speech tonight.
And we got a lot that we're going to be covering here the next hour before the commander-in-chief starts to begin speaking here, Baker. But, of course, of the perceived good that you know he's going to talk about Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, that historic nomination to the Supreme Court. But you're right, the issues there that are perceived to be not going so well for the president's favor seem to dominate the conversation. 41% approval rating. That is the lowest that we've had in modern presidency for a president giving his first official State of the Union since 4 years ago, former President Donald Trump. You're right there to say a stalled agenda, a dismal dismal approval rating, CDC mixed messaging with regards to COVID-19. You're right, the president does not want to have to repeat what he said last Independence Day, which is we are declaring our independence from the virus only for a subsequent variant to then oftentimes frustrate the American people with regards to mixed messaging, labor shortages, supply chain headaches, and of course lingering over all of this, as if all that weren't enough, ongoing geopolitical crisis breaking out right now in Eastern Europe. We will now turn our attention to the heart of the action. Our very own Ariel Hickson is on Capitol Hill. There is no better beat, no better assignment for a historic night like State of the Union than to be on Capitol Hill itself. Ariel, talk to us. What are you seeing? Who are you seeing? And really, what is the mood there?
You are so right, JD. There is no other better place to be but here in Washington, D.C. This is the hottest place to be in Washington, D.C. right now for the president's big night, his first State of the Union. And you know what? It was a bit tricky getting in here. Of course, there were some road closures and, of course, there was some fencing, but that was for a good reason. Now, it's a bit different from last year. Last year, not all members were invited. Only 200 or so were in attendance. And last year as well, there was some mask requirements. Now, this year, it is optional in the chamber, and you're going to see some of the lawmakers really taking that going forward. But already there have been at least 5 different Democrats who have tested positive for COVID-19 who will not be there at this point. But at this particular point, there are no guests who are allowed for these members. But First Lady Jill Biden is going to be bringing a handful of guests, including Ukrainian ambassador and Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower. So that's going to be on everyone's minds tonight. Now, the president has a lot on his plate, as you guys did mention. He's going to talk about the economy. He's going to talk about Ukraine. He might even bring back Build Back Better. That's something that many people are definitely crossing their fingers for. But it's definitely going to be a very exciting night here on Capitol Hill, and can't wait to bring you all of the latest, JD.
Now, one of the fun here, Ariel, while we still have you, if you are a member of Congress, it may not be all eyes on you because you're not actually up there at the rostrum yourself. That's for the president. But lawmakers do like to talk with reporters like yourself. What are you hearing from lawmakers that you've been talking with there on Capitol Hill throughout the afternoon?
Well, I've been hearing a lot of excitement regarding this speech, regarding questions about what he is going to be addressing. There is concern regarding the economy. There is concern regarding inflation. And of course, all ears on Ukraine. That's something that many lawmakers are definitely having their eyes on, how he's going to approach that in his speech. Now, we know afterwards there's going to be the Republican answer to the speech where he's going to get a lot of criticism regarding this. But that is what many lawmakers have their eyes on, because you know what? It is a big topic right now that's affecting everything. Ukraine is affecting the economy. It's affecting all bits of our foreign communication right now. So that's something that is definitely on everyone's minds, JD.
Certainly is. Ariel Hickson there live for us in Emancipation Hall. Again, no better assignment on a night like tonight than where Ariel is, and no better person to have there on behalf of our broadcast than Ariel herself. Believe it or not, the President's State of the Union address, it's not the only thing happening in the world of politics tonight. For more on that, we now bring in our very own and my good friend Megan Pratt. She has traveled to the heart of the great state of Texas for the first midterm primary of the year. Megan, thank you for being here as well. What is going on down where you are?
Well, look, in Texas tonight, it is all about the election results. And this is a really big day for Texas because they're the first in the nation. Now, this is not a presidential year, right? A first in the nation caucus and or primary happens like way back in like midwinter. We're hitting spring today. It was gorgeous here today and still very mild this evening in Austin. So, JD, I think the main thing about tonight that's really, really key is that for the people voting, this speech won't matter. But this speech will be what is pulled from the GOP for attack ads against President Biden, against Nancy Pelosi, all of that messaging around all of those congressional seats, 1/3 of those Senate seats. A lot of that's going to come from tonight. And so there's a lot riding on this particular speech. This is also an opportunity for the president to explain why Americans are feeling so pinched, right? We know here in Texas, the main thing that really did happen today is that there were restrictions on voting. And so people would show up at the polls, JD, and they weren't able to vote. That's very challenging. But I think this midterm kickoff coinciding with State of the Union is a really good reminder that 2022 is an election year and that it really overshadows everything else that might be going on in politics, even when it's not the biggest thing like right now, JD.
Yeah, and Megan, we have to imagine that somewhere in the back of the president's mind, even with everything else going on, and there is no shortage of those things, is, of course, this year's midterms. And a very different chamber he may deliver this speech to this time next year. You're there in Texas, of course. You're kicking off the midterm season with the primary. How important is tonight's speech, you think, for changing the tide a little bit, helping change that momentum for the president and really for Democrats all over Washington?
I think Democrats are at a disadvantage right now because they are the party in power and people are struggling, right? We know the economy in a lot of metrics is quite strong, but those metrics that Americans feel, those things like inflationary rises, cost of goods, cost of gas, especially as people start to get their lives back post pandemic round 3, pandemic round 4, it really makes a difference, right? This is an opportunity for the president to speak directly to the American people and tell them how he's going to make their lives better. And in reading the speech excerpts that we've seen, the little bit of the speech that we've been able to access, that is going to be a key theme, how this president is going to make sure that things don't cost you as much. But that has to happen quickly, right? And if it doesn't happen quickly, the momentum from tonight's address is going to go away and people are going to keep voting, right? Starts tonight. It keeps going all through the summer. And then the general election, of course, on November 8th this fall, JD.
What a good reminder to encourage Americans to vote, not just when the presidency is on the line, but for local elections, mayoral elections, gubernatorial elections, midterm elections. People, this is what it's all about in a year like this of all years. So important, no matter who you vote for, that you take the time to make sure you're registered and you go through with the process. Megan's reporting tonight really underscoring that importance. Megan, thank you so much. We will have much more from our team throughout the evening, and it will be a long one. Remember, during the president's address, you can catch Baker and myself on YouTube offering up our own thoughts from time to time, a bit of context, a bit of fact-checking of the president as well. And, of course, an age-old tradition here for State of the Union on Cheddar News, State of the Union bingo. Baker,
yes.
We do this every year.
Yes,
what is on your card? You and I were talking a little bit before the show about what is on here. We do have some fun ones, for sure, for people to follow along with at home.
What is on your bingo card? My favorite pickup line at a bar, by the way. JD, there you see the bingo cards, player 1 and player 2. You can play along with me and JD. It's on our social media pages at Cheddar. There you see it on our Twitter account right now. Now, the differences are, a little small. I mean, obviously, there are going to be some of the big ones in here. Any mention of Ukraine is on there, maybe a shout out for Dr. Fauci. But then there's some of the hits on here. Biden references his pets, malarkey, mentions of Scranton, Pennsylvania. Here's the deal, which I would love so much if he opened up the State of the Union with, here's the deal, or malarkey, which would be amazing. So, of course, you can play along with me and JD. Likely, JD, with how easy some of these are, you'll likely get a bingo maybe within the first 5 or 10 minutes of the speech tonight. But either way, if you win, maybe get a Twitter shout out from you, which I know is like almost as good as a cameo.
I liked it a lot. If you're playing along at home, please tweet at Baker and myself and Megan and Ariel and the whole team and let us know. There are a few on here that I really like. I'm a Union guy.
Yes,
I got on my bingo speak. You see that at some point, right? Joe Biden. I'm Scranton Joe. That's it. I'm Union guy. I also got Biden whispers into the mic. That's a good one.
Go to the hits.
He gets dramatic sometimes, right? He leans low into the microphone. And I also like this one. I have in quotation marks, the prior administration, which I think is also code for him not saying Donald Trump's name explicitly, but sort of referencing what has happened here in Washington the last few years.
Either
it's gonna be a really fun one.
Either way, likely going to be incredibly busy. The only one I have a problem that I don't know he will mention will probably be the Olympics. That is one of the squares on here. And also, there's a Pelosi reacts on screen square. That seems a little vague and ambiguous because she tends to react about a bunch of different things. So I don't know what a reaction would mean to cross that off your bingo square.
Yeah, of course. I mean, look, we're doing this broadcast. The president is doing this speech tonight. Well, there is such serious news in the world, but this is a tradition that we have here on the show. We're going to have a little bit of fun here with the State of the Union, of course, while we report on all the very serious news of day and the very serious topics that the president will be discussing. So be sure to those of you at home watching the show to keep up with all of our coverage across your favorite social media platforms. We're on all of them, Twitter, TikTok, and, of course, at cheddar.com. Our amazing digital team has the latest from the Commander-in-Chief's speech in a special live blog. You can check it out by scanning the QR code that is there on your screen right now. Coming up on this very, very special edition of None of the Above, we will have much more from the great state of Texas on today's primary and how gerrymandering shapes American politics. The president's first official State of the Union kicks off in under an hour. More show after this. Stay here.
It's the weekend. Finally, some time for yourself to reflect on everything that's happened this week. From people making headlines to market movers to the week's most impactful stories. Catch up on all of it on the Weekend Wrap, hosted by me, Ken Bufa. That's the one. That's the one. Bees a gang. Bees a gang. Check out the Weekend Wrap Fridays at 7. I'll see you there.
Cheddar Bets focuses on those who are looking for an edge. This show breaks down every facet of the sports betting industry, from favorites and underdogs to parlay perfection and last-minute line movements, to overall opportunities within the betting market. Everything you need to know is in one place. New customers can place a $10 moneyline wager on any pro basketball game and get $200 in free bets. Use bonus code Cheddar. Tune in to Cheddar Bets, brought to you by BetMGM, Thursdays at 4:30 p.m.
The most extraordinary aspect of New York is its unrivaled network of infrastructure systems working to keep the city breathing. Systems that can process 12,000 tons of trash.
You need us to clean your community. Without us, things won't be too pretty.
Treat 1.3 billion gallons of wastewater.
This is nasty!
And light the lamps of millions of buildings every day. Join Cheddar and Curiosity Stream in NYC Revealed.
We don't have an agenda. We cover the stories people actually care about. And we give perspective on the world around us with breakdowns that people can understand. This is none of the above. Check out our new primetime show on Cheddar News weeknights at 8 p.m.
Tune in all month long as we celebrate Women's History Month. Join us as we discuss female leadership and empowerment and explore the authentic stories of trailblazers making a difference across industries. Spend your March with Cheddar News as we celebrate Women's History Month.
Is the State of the Union necessary? Article 2, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution says the president
shall, from time to time, give to the Congress information of the State of the Union.
The president usually uses this as an opportunity to talk about things like the economy, public health, maybe the budget, but it wasn't always about giving an actual speech. The State of the Union was more like a book report that the president would just give to Congress. Warren G. Harding's speech in 1922 was the first one to be broadcast over the radio. Harry Truman's speech in 1947 was the first one ever on television, and Bill Clinton's in 1997 was the first broadcast live on the World Wide Web.
And the more you know. Welcome back, everyone, to None of the Above presents the State of the Union. I'm Baker Machado in New York. Let me bring in my partner, Megan Pratt's live in the heart of Texas. That's because that's the first midterm primary of the year happening down there. So, Megan, what is happening down in Texas? Polls have not closed just yet. So what's happening right now in the Texas primary? A lot of big races to really keep our eyes on tonight.
There are a ton of big races, and a big part of the reason that there are so many big races, Baker, is because Texas goes first, right? So whenever you're first, all eyes are on you, and people like elections. They like watching it play out, and so this is a lot of fun. Now, look, there are 2 new congressional seats in Texas. They got the most in redistricting, so there's definitely a desire to watch those 2 open seats and see exactly who makes it through. The main thing that's going to be interesting, though, about Texas is that a lot of their districts are very solid one way or another, solidly blue or solidly red. So who emerges from the primary? Is it a Trump-style candidate? Is it an establishment-style candidate? What does the modern GOP look like? Texas is going to be a great measure of that. And we have a number of sort of those democratic socialist type candidates on the ballot in Texas trying to turn this state a lot more purple. I think that is something to watch. But perhaps the biggest race, or definitely the biggest race, isn't a Senate race this year, not a Senate race in Texas, but it's the governor's mansion, which is actually not far from me here in Austin. And Governor Greg Abbott is likely going to win the Republican nomination and face off against everyone's favorite Texas Democrat, or certainly the one we probably know the best, Beto O'Rourke. So that they're both definitely the front runners in that, and we'll be watching for that final result. But Texas is, I think, in a lot of ways, a state to watch for 2022, not just because they're going first, but because of those 2 new seats, because of these big races, and honestly, Baker, because it's a state that really is changing demographically in its voting population.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, some of the other big ones to watch, how do progressives do, especially along the border of Texas this year? That's one big race to watch. watch. And then also the Texas Attorney General race. You have Ken Paxton, the current Attorney General, who just got endorsed by former President Donald Trump. Does he hang on, or do you see a Bush, George P. Bush, win this? Or do you see Louis Gohmert, who's also running for the Attorney General in Texas, win that as well? So something really to watch. But let's also talk about gerrymandering here, because Texas Republicans completely redrew their state's congressional map earlier this year, no doubt incredibly favoring the Republican Party in that state here. So what are some of the things we need to watch when it comes to this map, Megan?
Well, look, Texas Republicans had a really good year in 2021. They got to draw their ideal map and made a lot of their sort of borderline, maybe even turning blue states solidly red by moving them out of cities and attaching exurbs, those sort of further out suburbs, to the suburbs and making those redder districts. The other thing that they got in 2021 was a lot of voter restrictions passed. Those have played out today at the polls as well. But when we talk about redistricting, a lot of times you think of like the funny shapes of the different districts that you're seeing, or, you know, why is it only separated by water, or why is it only separated by a single road, like a famous district in Illinois? And I wanted to know where the term gerrymandering even came from. It has such a great history, Baker. And because I am a giver, I am going to give you the gift of teaching you tonight as well. Take a look.
You've probably heard the term gerrymandering before, right? For such a strange political buzzword, it actually impacts your life a lot more than you might expect. Every 10 years, there's a census. That decennial count is long and tedious and arduous and important because it confirms who lives where, so the federal government properly allocates resources, so services go to the places that need them most, and yes, so states gain or lose seats in Congress and have the opportunity to redraw all their state and congressional lines. That means every 10 years, states start what has famously been one of the most partisan and divisive processes in politics, because one strategic line can mean the difference in party control in not just the state legislatures, but also in all of Congress. So where does the salamander come in? Well, for that, we have to go back in time to 1812, during Massachusetts redistricting. The party in power at the time, the Democratic Republicans, wanted to make sure the districts they were drawing, well, favored them, which resulted in some funny-looking shapes, including this one. Does this resemble an amphibian to anyone? The Boston Globe certainly thought so, and blamed the state's governor at the time, Elbridge Gerry. See where I'm going? Thus the term gerrymandering, or gerrymandering as we say it now, of Governor Gerry approving a salamander-shaped district joined the English lexicon. And that's typically been the point of gerrymandering throughout history: partisan advantage. So you might be wondering, okay, this is interesting and all, but why should I care? Fair question. But remember, the laws that impact you most, the people who legislate in ways that change your daily life, they don't live in Washington, and they can draw themselves into power for decades. So they won't just draw this map, they'll draw maps well into the future. Unfortunately, there's only so much we can do to fix the problem, and it's mostly our own fault. People tend to want to live near people who are like them. That means Democratic voters tend to flock to big cities with diverse and varied experiences and people. Republicans tend to live in more spread out rural areas and small towns. There are always going to be heavily Democratic seats and heavily Republican seats. But remember, parties in power are always looking to give themselves an advantage. So they might turn to packing or cracking. Basically, parties like to shove opposition voters into districts that dilute their vote by either packing all those voters into a limited space or spreading those voters across multiple districts. Here's the deal. If you don't like the districts in your state, you do have one major power to exercise: your power to vote. You can vote in lawmakers who will draw fairer districts. You can tell those elected officials to adopt an independent commission. Because while gerrymandering is as American as apple pie, so is voting. Democracy works if you work it. So you want something to change? Do something about it.
So yes, Baker, they finally let me talk about gerrymandering on air for a significant period of time. Today is the best day of my life. So you're welcome. I loved learning about this package. I loved putting this together. And I think it's so fun that we're all saying it wrong. And actually it should be gerrymandering, Baker.
You learn something every day on this. Megan Pratt's Good Stuff in Texas. And don't worry, everyone. We're going to have a lot more from our team throughout the night as well. Ariel Hickson will be giving us a behind-the-scenes look at the Capitol building before members of Congress enter the chamber. That's happening on our Instagram story, so be sure to keep up with all of our coverage across your favorite social media platforms, all from Twitter to TikTok. And, of course, head on to our website, cheddar.com, as well. Coming up next on this very special edition of None of the Above, we're not done talking about gerrymandering, how that process could determine the balance of power across this country, and who controls Congress. We're discussing that when we return.
Start your day and end your day with Cheddar News. Watch Wake Up with Cheddar to get informed on the events impacting the world around you. And finish your day with Cheddar's News Wrap, catching you up on the people, technology, and politics influencing our culture. Reporting on everything you need to know. Get your twice daily news fix on Cheddar News, weekdays 7 to 9 a.m. and 5 to 6 p.m.
What's good on TikTok?
Who's going to space this week?
What is the it fit here?
Oh, you need to see this.
I cannot believe it's ending. I'm shook. I am rattled senseless.
Spoiler alert.
This is a spoiler alert. Get your midday culture break on with Between Bells, weekdays from 12 to 2 p.m.
Ah, it's the weekend. Finally some time for yourself to reflect on everything that's happened this week. From people making headlines to market movers to the week's most impactful stories. Catch up on all of it on the Weekend Wrap, hosted by me, Ken Buffa. That's the one. That's the one. Be's a gang. Be's a gang. Check out the Weekend Wrap Fridays at 7. I'll see you there.
Tune in all month long as we celebrate Women's History Month. Join us as we discuss female leadership and empowerment and explore the authentic stories of trailblazers making a difference across industries. Spend your March with Cheddar News as we celebrate Women's History Month.
We don't have an agenda. We cover the stories people actually care about. And we give perspective on the world around us with breakdowns that people can understand. This is None of the Above. Check out our new primetime show on Cheddar News weeknights at 8 p.m. Welcome back to this very, very special edition of None of the Above. We present the State of the Union beginning here in 32 or so minutes. Every 10 years, right after each census, there is a constitutionally required process known as redistricting. Ah, yes, we redraw our lines. You may know it as gerrymandering or gerrymandering, as we just learned. Thank you, Megan. This process has long been a foothold in American democracy. There are critics who say they hate gerrymandering. It doesn't mean they don't do it as well, because everyone does. We are joined now by Michael Lee. Michael is senior counsel for the Brennan Center's Democracy Program. Michael, I always love talking to you about this issue. Welcome to the show on a very special night. So how significant an issue will gerrymandering be, you think, during the speech tonight? Because this is something that's happening all across the country as the president speaks. It's very much in the background. People are paying attention to it, right?
It should be a topic tonight, along with voting rights. This was a major push that President Biden had earlier, but legislation to fix the problem of gerrymandering, to improve voting rights in this country, failed in the Senate. And it's not clear that the president is going to pick it back up at this point in time. Certainly, voting rights advocates around the country are hoping that he does, because it is an important subject. Where he's going to talk about democracy around the world. It's important also to remember that we need to talk about democracy at home and how our democracy doesn't quite work in the ways that we would all like it to work and think that it should work.
Yeah, a republic if you can keep it, said Benjamin Franklin famously. And this is the sort of thing that makes people wonder, are we really doing it the right way? Because you and I have talked before about the way with which gerrymandering does come at the expense of communities of color. And I'm hoping you're able to get into that with us a little bit more here in our primetime broadcast, Michael. And what does that mean for the president and for the Democratic Party today?
Well, certainly around the country this decade, with the redrawing of the maps, we've seen aggressive targeting of communities of color. Communities of color were 100% of the population growth of the country last decade. And yet in states like Texas and Georgia, you see that Republican map drawers not only failed to create new opportunities, in many cases they went backwards, especially in Texas, where, for example, in the very diverse suburbs of places like Dallas and Houston, you have naturally emerging multiracial coalitions coming to the fore and winning power, almost winning power. Instead, what you saw in redistricting is that you saw those districts aggressively dismantled. And, you saw parts of those districts stuck in with districts in urban areas and parts of them stuck into districts with rural areas. And the effect is that you're diminishing the power of political the political power of communities of color. And that really is an attack on the emerging multiracial America that is coming to the fore.
Well, speaking of the word attack, Democrats love to attack Republicans in a state like Texas when they gerrymander, but that doesn't mean Democrats don't do it too. Michael, what have we seen already this cycle as it pertains to the blue stronghold of the state of New York? Some have said Democrats of all parties, they're the ones putting on the masterclass as to how redistricting is actually done in a way that sort of infringes on the political opportunity of your opponent. What are we seeing there?
Yeah, so there's a lot of focus always on Republican gerrymandering because Republicans control the drawing of 187 seats around the country. Democrats only control the drawing of 75. But this decade, what we've seen is in states like New York and Illinois, where Democrats control the process, they have been equally aggressive this cycle. In the past, sometimes they've been asleep at the wheel a little bit. This cycle, they have picked up the gerrymandering pen and used it aggressively to target and take out Republican incumbents. And so in New York, you have a map that has 22 Democratic districts and 4 Republican districts. And New York is a pretty Democratic state. It's not quite that Democratic. And to do that, they achieve these really weird configurations, joining communities like Staten Island with Park Slope in Brooklyn, which, really, if you know anything about those areas, like have nothing in common. And that's really to shore up their political advantage.
People like to think that voters pick their politicians. This kind of proves the opposite. Aren't politicians picking their voters, Michael?
In this case, they are, and that's there's a sharp contrast to the way that states like New York and Texas, where it's a political process, and you have political outcomes, to the much fairer processes in states like California and Michigan, where maps are very fair, both from a partisan perspective, but also from a racial perspective, and it's really night and day, and I think you see a clearer contrast with this decade's maps than perhaps you have ever. And it really does highlight the need for reforms. And, I think you're already seeing a lot of action with people trying to get new measures on the ballot in states around the country, or talking about it for next decade, because, this decade's maps are drawn. We're still fighting about some of them in court, but, there's already people talking about what we will do for next decade and taking and building on some of the things that have worked around the country in states like California, Colorado, Michigan.
Donald Trump may not be given the State of the Union tonight, but there's no doubt that, quite frankly, a lot of the lies, let's call it like it is, a lot of the BS that Donald Trump has shoveled over the course of the last few years, the big lie, the election in 2020 was stolen, it was undemocratic, it was rigged, we really won, Joe Biden really lost. Even if we know that demonstrably to be false, Michael, that did sort of leave or sort of embolden Republicans at the state level here to kind of go back and draw the maps under this guise of election integrity. So even if tonight's focus is not the former president, how have we seen his rhetoric help shape some of the map redrawing that we've seen so far this year, even if Donald Trump is no longer president?
Well, I think you've in states like Texas. I think there was a lot of fear of sort of the change. Republicans in states like Texas took a look at the future, and for all the bravado about we're going to win back the suburbs, we're going to start winning the votes of people of color, they didn't draw maps that way. They sort of like targeted the suburbs, they targeted communities of color really very fearfully, and they really created these fortress type districts. There used to be 11 districts in Texas, and Donald Trump won by 15 or more points. Now there are 21, and Republicans only have 24 districts in Texas. So 21 out of the 24 districts they have in Texas are these super Trump districts that are really fortress districts that it will be very hard for Democrats to win, even in a blue tsunami. And that's, I think, what you see, they've really decided we're going to keep what we have. And that's not just in Texas. You see that played out in state after state where Republicans drew maps around the country because they sort of looked at the future. They were really fearful of it. The corollary to that, of course, is there are also a lot of voter suppression laws, the laws that make it harder to vote. And that's all fits together, right? This is trying to put your finger on the scale and your thumb on the scale and to try to rig sort of the outcome of these elections, and both by making it harder to vote, but then also predetermining who will win, even if you do get to vote.
Michael, we've been talking throughout this evening about the president's, really Democrats writ large's stalled agenda. One of those things is voting rights. What do we know that Democrats would have wanted to get done that maybe would have leveled out the playing field of the entire gerrymandering or redistricting conversation? Was there anything there in the heart of voting rights or these massive bills Democrats wanted to get across the finish line by now? Of course, they've been unable to, that would have changed this conversation for this crucial redistricting year?
Oh, there's a whole lot. The Freedom to Vote John Lewis Act, which died in the Senate because they couldn't overcome the filibuster, would have banned partisan gerrymandering by statute. It would have strengthened protections in redistricting for communities of color. It also would have set national standards for voting, which would have, ended some of these voter suppression laws that are, targeting the ability to vote by mail, limiting, how you can vote and things like that. And it would have been hugely transformative because for the first time we would have had uniform national standards. We would have had a minimum that every state would have to follow. And unfortunately, that couldn't get past the filibuster in the Senate, and two Democrats were unwilling to change the rules to allow it to pass, without 60 votes. And so, we are going into an election cycle where we don't have those protections. And I think we're going to see throughout this year, starting with Texas, how devastating some of these, the failure to pass that federal legislation really is. And, I think there are lots of people who will have to own that.
What an incredible perspective on a very important topic at a very important moment in our modern politics. Michael Lee, Senior Counsel for the Brennan Center's Democracy Program. Michael, nice to see you again. Enjoyed the president's speech tonight. Great to have you. Baker, I'm going to bring you in here. Any thoughts here as it pertains to this whole redistricting? I just come back to this idea of politicians are picking their voters. And I know it seems like a little bit of a stretch, but it's really not, because that is kind of what is happening. We are reminded of it, as our colleague Megan broke down really well a few minutes ago. We do this in this country every 10 years, and this is really an important one.
Absolutely, JD. And going into this, Democrats really felt that they were going to be really behind the eight ball here. Republicans were going to heavily, according to Democrats, gerrymander not just Texas, Florida, all these other states that actually added House seats coming up here. Colorado also got a new one as well. They are basically part of an independent commission that allows an independent commission that has Republicans and Democrats to be a part of it to choose who's going to be in that new seat here. But it's really interesting to sort of see who's now going to be basically the front runner here. Let's go actually to a live look we're getting right now inside the chamber right now. You see the vice president who is walking in right now. This, of course, just started just a few moments ago. The Speaker of the House basically calling the entire session basically to order. You see some members of the Senate right there. Debbie Stabenow, the senator from Michigan, coming in right there. Ben Cardin from Maryland as well, and Sheldon Whitehouse as well. There you see Nancy Pelosi and the vice president. This is interesting, JD, because as we mentioned at the top of the show, no masks right now in Congress. It's so interesting and sort of ominous because we remember President Biden's speech last year. You had both the vice president and the Speaker of the House wearing their masks through the duration of Joe Biden's speech. Not going to be this case at all tonight. It actually will be more interesting to see if you can find any members of Congress wearing a mask tonight.
Yeah, that's right. Of course, this just is coincidentally timed. Some would say it's not so much of a coincidence, but just 2 days ago on Sunday, the U.S. Capitol's attending physician lifted that mask mandate for lawmakers inside the House chamber here. The Capitol physician, Brian Monahan, saying individuals may choose to mask at any time, but it is no longer a requirement. This as test rates here in our nation's capital are down to about 2.7% or so over the course of the last few weeks. It is worth noting here, though, however, Baker, let's not forget, as we see a few people like Hakeem Jeffries, a hand on the shoulder there of Joe Manchin. Those aren't two Democrats you see frequently talking. There is a testing requirement here, getting a COVID test at least 1 day before being in the chamber tonight. So as you see here already by the numbers, that's probably going to be okay for most members of Congress. But we've already had some Republicans like Marco Rubio, Chip Roy, a House Republican from Texas, have said, basically, I don't have time to take a COVID test, so I am not going to show up. Okay, it's a few brief moments of your time, but you're clearly, if you're Marco Rubio, you're making a bigger point to say these are ridiculous restrictions, even if you're going to make me get tested here. So that is important to keep in mind as you do see. I also wonder, will the president be shaking hands, which frequently happens? I don't know. We've all reevaluated the handshake over the course of the last few years, so we'll see what it what it brings when the president enters the chamber.
It's interesting because heading into the election of 2020, Democrats, and I believe they were correct, believe that COVID was really on their side in the sense that it was polling on their side, because a lot of voters going into 2020 didn't really like the Trump administration's policies when it came to combating COVID. Now, when you look at exit polls right now, Americans are just so exasperated by COVID. A recent poll from Monmouth University said 70% of Americans have now just come to the acceptance that COVID is here to stay, but want to move on with their lives. And now you've seen almost all Democrats basically fall in line with that. You had Sean Patrick Maloney, who runs the Democratic campaign arm for House Democrats, basically say that they're not even going to be talking about COVID as much anymore, especially in moments like this, because Americans just want to move on. So I'm curious to see how much of COVID President Biden talks about tonight, because look, some epidemiologists, including Dr. Fauci, say we should not let our guard down because who knows what subsequent wave might happen. In Hong Kong right now, they're about to go into a full-blown lockdown again in Hong Kong. How much of that gets addressed right now, or Americans basically say, look, we want to basically move on from this?
Yeah, and it actually may be difficult to see from the image we have here, but we will see throughout the night. You will see a lot more blue and yellow, dark blue and yellow, of course, standing in solidarity with the tremendous people of Ukraine. And we all send our best to them this evening. And that is true for everyone who's in attendance in the House chamber there as well. What a historic night we have on tap for our viewers indeed. Coming up here in just a bit, more on what to expect from the president's first official State of the Union address tonight, including whether or not the commander-in-chief can make another push for Build Back Better. Stay with us here on Cheddar News. A big night ahead.
The most extraordinary aspect of New York is its unrivaled network of infrastructure systems working to keep the city breathing. Systems that can process 12,000 tons of trash.
You need us to clean your community. Without us, things won't be too pretty.
Treat 1.3 billion gallons of wastewater.
This is nasty.
And light the lamps of millions of buildings every day. Join Cheddar and Curiosity Stream in NYC Revealed.
Our goals were even more important than ever, helping women get the capital they need to grow and launch businesses.
I'm so excited to see and show that you can have a successful company, but also one that does good.
Little amounts consistently add up. Is your discomfort worth the amount of money that you might be able to make?
Take calculated risks. Crisis and adversity can lead to innovations.
If you believe in something, you can achieve it.
Start your day and end your day with Cheddar News. Watch Wake Up with Cheddar to get informed on the events impacting the world around you. And finish your day with Cheddar's News Wrap, catching you up on the people, technology, and politics influencing our culture. Reporting on everything you need to know. Get your twice daily news fix on Cheddar News, weekdays 7 to 9 a.m. and 5 to 6 p.m.
What's good on TikTok?
Who's going to space this week?
What is the it fit here?
Oh, you need to see this.
I cannot believe it's ending. I'm shook. I am rattled senseless.
Spoiler alert.
This is a spoiler alert. Get your midday culture break on with Between Bells, weekdays from 12 to 2 p.m. Of the State of the Union address. I'm Baker Machado in New York. President Biden addressing the nation in an incredibly fraught moment tonight. That's because inflation is at a 40-year high. Russia has invaded Ukraine. And oh yeah, there's still the pandemic with us. Biden's speech has to be both confronting all those ills facing Americans, but also chart a path forward. That as his party prepares for a potential bloodbath come November. So here with more, let's bring in Francesca Chambers, White House correspondent over at McClatchy. Francesca, great to see you as always. Now, we just learned just a few hours ago that President Biden's going to announce tonight that Russian aircraft is going to be banned in the U.S. airspace. But broadly, how do you sort of think this is a difficult act for the president to sort of walk, addressing Ukraine, while also sort of ensuring that much of the speech is really centered tonight on domestic concerns? Because we know at the end of the day, that's really what Americans care about.
Yeah, no pressure as you lay out all those challenges for President Biden tonight. The White House says that this isn't the same speech that he would have given even a few months ago, and that while national security has always been a focus of State of the Union addresses, it will be even more so now because of the crisis that's taking place in Ukraine. And we would expect tonight that the president will again talk about U.S. humanitarian assistance, military assistance to Ukraine, and the West and how they are rallying behind sanctions against Russia right now. How much, again, as you point out, how long he spends on that in tonight's speech, we'll just have to wait and see, because we also know that he does want to talk about the economy and want to talk about legislation that he would like Congress to pass also.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a moment, because the president's expected, again, to push for more of his economic agenda here. But really, there's been no indication right now of anything happening in Congress. His biggest potential social achievement would be the Build Back Better bill, but that's stalled in the Senate, and Joe Manchin has basically said it's dead. So does the White House see a path now to sort of address these issues in an election year, or given the fact that it is an election year, nothing likely is going to get done here?
Well, the White House says that the president still sees a pathway here and that he'll push tonight for some of those elements that we just outlined. He is going to push on prescription drugs. He's going to push on childcare. We also expect the president to push for a national paid family and medical leave program again tonight. But to your point as to whether or not it can get done, even if there is agreement on some of the key points of that, we don't know that the sticking points have been resolved, or if they can be resolved in the next few weeks and months here. You also have to remember that the president, the Senate, they're going to be working on the Supreme Court nomination too, and there will be a vote on that likely before they head into an Easter recess. So again, as we talk about Russia and Ukraine and these other domestic priorities, there's just a lot for the president to focus on tonight, but also for the Senate and Congress over the next few months.
You mentioned the Supreme Court here. No doubt the president's going to talk about Ketanji Brown Jackson's nomination, the historic nature of that. Is that the major win that the president needs, especially when it comes to Democratic voters, given the fact that, yes, he basically did promise that he was going to nominate a black woman to be on the Supreme Court? Is that going to be the thing that sort of re-galvanizes Democrats back to him here?
He did promise that at a South Carolina debate during the presidential primary. And when you speak to folks like Congressman Clyburn, who helped push him to do that, they do believe that this is something that will show the party's base that President Biden is, quote unquote, keeping his promises to them. But again, as you head into the midterm elections, there's so many other things that the voters are concerned about, like inflation, like the economy, like COVID-19, and how much credit they give him for putting a black woman on the Supreme Court and come out and vote for that as compared to some of these other big ticket items. We just don't know yet.
Francesca, as we were just talking just a few moments ago, and as our viewers can see in the House chamber right now, very little masks being worn right now at the State of the Union. The White House, we should also know, dropped its mandate for fully vaccinated people to come to the White House. We know with what happened in Virginia recently with Glenn Youngkin winning that race, he basically really relied on a lot of suburban voters regarding COVID and closures of schools and really hit Terry McAuliffe, the Democrat, in that race. Do you think COVID was a reason that basically that Democrats have to push the reset button on all of this, and that's why you're not seeing masks right now in the chamber, because Democrats know that this might be a losing issue for them come to the midterms?
Well, and I think you touched on this a little bit earlier, that the CDC has since changed its guidance on masking. And in the Washington, D.C. area, there is a much lower prevalence of spread at this point. And so when you look at that masking, plus the White House also changing its guidance on masking, you're also seeing Congress follow suit here. But you do see tonight in the chamber that there is social distancing, that they have been required to test negative for COVID-19. And as we can see from some of the lawmakers in the room there, they're not having a problem, many of them saying saying hello to some of their colleagues. And as you noted, the president may also greet folks with a handshake or a hug or a back pat when he enters the room also.
All right, Francesca Chambers, White House correspondent over at McClatchy. Always good to see you, Francesca. Thanks so much. Now, we're going to have more from our team throughout the night tonight. And remember, during President Biden's address, we're live streaming the event with commentary from me and JD. Be sure to keep up with all of our coverage across your favorite social platforms, from Twitter to TikTok. And of course, head on over to our website, cheddar.com as well. That's where our amazing digital team has the latest from the president's speech in a special live blog. And you can check it out by scanning the QR code on your screen right now. And next up, everyone, we're discussing the Biden administration's handling of the pandemic. How does President Biden address that tonight? We're discussing when we return.
It's the weekend. Finally, some time for yourself to reflect on everything that's happened this week. From people making headlines to market movers to the week's most impactful stories. Catch up on all of it on the Weekend Wrap, hosted by me, Ken Buffa. That's the one. That's the one. Bees a gig. Bees a gig. Check out the Weekend Wrap Fridays at 7. I'll see you there.
Cheddar Bets focuses on those who are looking for an edge. This show breaks down every facet of the sports betting industry, from favorites and underdogs to parlay perfection and last-minute line movements, to overall opportunities within the betting market. Everything you need to know is in one place. New customers can place a $10 moneyline wager on any pro basketball game and get $200 in free bets. Use bonus code Cheddar. Tune in to Cheddar Bets, brought to you by BetMGM, Thursdays at 4:30 p.m.
The most extraordinary aspect of New York is its unrivaled network of infrastructure systems working to keep the city breathing. Systems that can process 12,000 tons of trash.
You need us to clean your community. Without us, things won't be too pretty.
Treat 1.3 billion gallons of wastewater.
This is nasty.
And light the lamps of millions of buildings every day. Join Cheddar and Curiosity Stream in NYC Revealed.
We don't have an agenda. We cover the stories people actually care about. And we give perspective on the world around us with breakdowns that people can understand. This is none of the above. Check out our new primetime show on Cheddar News weeknights at 8 p.m.
Tune in all month long as we celebrate Women's History Month. Join us as we discuss female leadership and empowerment and explore the authentic stories of trailblazers making a difference across industries. Spend your March with Cheddar News as we celebrate Women's History Month.
Welcome back to None of the Above presents the State of the Union. No one really could have predicted this global pandemic, not even the globe's leaders. And unfortunately for former President Donald Trump, the coronavirus fell on his shoulders and then was handed off to the incumbent president once Biden was elected in November of 2020. Here to break down the latest from the pandemic, as well as this president's handling of the virus, is Boston Globe editorial page editor and former White House disaster policy advisor, Bina Venkatraman. Bina, nice to see you again. Thank you so much for taking the time, especially ahead here just a few minutes of when the president is expected to speak. So COVID case numbers, Bina, they have returned to pre-Omicron levels. How much of a role are you expecting the pandemic to play tonight in the president's remarks?
I expect the president to, of course, address the loss and suffering from this pandemic. And even though we're in a particularly good moment now with case numbers falling, as you've noted, the Omicron peak behind us, there's been an accumulated toll of this. We're nearing the 1 million death mark here in the United States from the pandemic, and also an accumulated toll of the isolation and the precautions we've been taking, a fatigue that's really settled in among the American people in terms of dealing with the pandemic and the restrictions that it's involved and the economic loss it's involved, the loss of work, the loss of time with family, and the grief. And so I expect this empathetic president to relate to the American people and their experience of this pandemic, but also to sort of sound a positive note. We're in a midterm election year. People are ready to focus on the positive. I would expect him to be gazing ahead and talking about reduced restrictions. We know in the coming days, the administration is going to be releasing a strategy for looking ahead in the pandemic, which should involve investments in testing and treatment centers and continued vaccine distribution, but also a sense of reducing some of those public health restrictions that have been in place over the past 2+ years. So I think we're going to see the president talk about COVID-19, but he also has so much more to cover. His social spending and climate spending agenda, the Build Back Better Act, of course, and he's really eager to see Congress pass that and build public support for that. But he's also addressing a global audience in this speech. So we know that he's addressing Vladimir Putin in this speech. He's addressing our NATO and European allies. So covering the pandemic is going to have to fit in the context of addressing a whole host of real priorities, as well as this real diplomatic win he's had in forming the coalition to respond to Russia and getting bipartisan support for those sanctions.
Yeah, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky even telling reporters in the Ukraine earlier today he will be listening for what the president has to say. So certainly the eyes of the world are on this. Bina, as you know, this last 4th of July, Joe Biden stood there. He declared our independence from the virus. The Omicron variant, several months later, had other plans in store. What should Americans take into account if they do hear words of optimism once again from this president with regards to where we are in this pandemic?
Well, I would expect the White House speechwriters who wrote that July 4th speech are right now very aware of what happened after that. Of course, the Delta variants and the Omicron variants very much complicated that picture of sort of mission accomplished or this is behind us. So I would imagine that we won't hear as much optimism. And, if we do, I think the notion that we have made a lot of progress. So more than 2/3 of Americans have had 2 doses of vaccine. 3/4 of Americans are at least partially vaccinated. There's more immunity from the fact that Omicron spread so widely. There are reasons to think that we are in a good position at the moment with respect to the pandemic. But we know, because so much of the world is not vaccinated, that new variants can arise. We also know that this White House hasn't necessarily been able to look ahead in all instances. So we should have had testing and widespread distribution of tests in place before that Omicron peak happened. And so the American public should be skeptical of any sort of mission accomplished language they might hear. But I would be, very surprised to actually hear that come out of the president's mouth today. On the other hand, I think there's a reason to think that at least now we're in a moment where we can have a little bit of optimism about things opening back up. But hope that this White House will be really proactive about thinking a few steps ahead about future variants and really focused on distribution of vaccines globally to prevent the rise of those variants, as well as the ability to put into place new public health measures as needed and communicate those clearly, which has also been another area where the Biden administration could do better. I would give it an average grade in terms of communication from the CDC about the basis for the decisions they're making.
Bina Venkatraman, we must leave things there, my friend. A busy and historic night. I'm sure you understand. We certainly look forward to having you back here on Cheddar News soon to continue our conversation. Bina is Boston Globe editorial page editor, also former White House disaster policy advisor. We did just see moments ago there members of the U.S. Supreme Court come into the chamber. Coming up here in just a bit, the chamber is filling up, and we are getting ready for the arrival of the president as we see First Lady Jill Biden with a very long guest list. She is entering the chamber as we speak. None of the above will return with the first official State of the Union of Joe Biden on the other side of this very quick break. Stay here.
Start your day and end your day with Cheddar News. Watch Wake Up with Cheddar to get informed on the events impacting the world around you. And finish your day with Cheddar's News Wrap, catching you up on the people, technology, and politics influencing our culture. Reporting on everything you need to know. Get your twice daily news fix on Cheddar News, weekdays 7 to 9 a.m. and 5 to 6 p.m.
What's good on TikTok?
Who's going to space this week?
What is the it fit here?
Oh, you need to see this.
I cannot believe it's ending. I'm shook. I am rattled senseless.
Spoiler alert.
This is a spoiler alert. Get your midday culture break on with Between Bells, weekdays from 12 to 2 p.m.
It's the weekend. Finally, some time for yourself to reflect on everything that's happened this week. From people making headlines to market movers to the week's most impactful stories. Catch up on all of it on the Weekend Wrap, hosted by me, Ken Buffa. That's the one. That's the one. He's the gang. Bees a gig. Check out the Weekend Wrap Fridays at 7. I'll see you there.
Tune in all month long as we celebrate Women's History Month. Join us as we discuss female leadership and empowerment and explore the authentic stories of trailblazers making a difference across industries. Spend your March with Cheddar News as we celebrate Women's History Month.
We don't have an agenda. We cover the stories people actually care about. And we give perspective on the world around us with breakdowns that people can understand. This is none of the above. Check out our new primetime show on Cheddar News weeknights at 8 p.m. Let's do it. Welcome back to None of the Above presents the State of the Union. We are here in the final moments. We've made it, my friends. Deep breath. Final moments before the president's first official State of the Union. I am once again joined by our incredible team with us here all night long. Baker Machado in New York, Ariel Hickson on Capitol Hill, Megan Pratt, of course, in the great state of Texas. Baker, let me start with you. What are you looking for tonight, my friend?
Obviously, inflation going to be a top priority for the Biden administration tonight. The president is going to be talking about building more things in this country as a way to combat inflation. So that no doubt going to be a big thing. Ginny, I'm also curious about how the president addresses what's happening in Ukraine tonight. As we've been telling you today, the president had to rewrite most of the drafts of his speech to update the American public about what's been going on in the region. We know he did speak to President Zelensky earlier today. Will he talk about that? That's going to be interesting. Also, the Kremlin is saying that, telling at least CNN anyway, that Vladimir Putin does not plan to be watching President Biden's speech tonight. So any sort of things that he says about Putin no doubt will be reading tomorrow morning in the newspapers, JD.
Yeah, absolutely. And a quick news update, by the way, because we've been wondering who the designated survivor is going to be this evening. It is not Kiefer Sutherland, folks. It is Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo. We've been trying to play the game of who was missing in Secretary Deb Haaland's big cabinet-wide selfie that she posted a bit ago, and it is, in fact, our Commerce Secretary who will not be in the chamber this evening. I'm going to head down to Texas now to Megan Pratt. Megan, you have a lot on your plate in terms of reporting for a night like this. What are you looking forward to hearing from the president as he's expected to speak here in just a little bit?
I have a couple of things that I want to hear from the president. One, I want him to explain to the American people how things are going to get better. There's been a lot of promise of a plan and not a lot of delivery of a plan. So that's definitely the main thing, JD. And then just waiting to hear if he talks at all about the midterms. Big year for him.
Yes, it absolutely. I always think back to 2010. I think it was the 2010 midterms when Obama famously said, "We got shellacked," we being the Democrats. And I always wonder now, what is in store for Joe Biden's first midterms? I mean, my goodness. It is, as we see, I believe, among other people there. Yes, Marjorie Taylor Greene. There she is. Okay, Ariel Hickson, speaking of Capitol Hill, you are there in the heart of the action. What are you looking forward to hearing tonight?
JD, I am in the room where it happens. Yes, the heart of the action. And you know what? This is a critical time in the president's presidency when he is really dealing with so many issues. You have the economy, you have inflation, supply chain issues. You also have that Build Back Better bill that he didn't get across the finish line. He got that $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill. That Build Back Better was something that many Democrats were quite concerned about. So I'm curious how he's going to tackle all of these issues and pretty much tie it up in a pretty bow to give us hope for the future. I'm also curious as well as to how Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds will deliver the Republican response after Biden's speech, the way that she's going to tackle that as well. You have Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell really saying at that point that you have to watch what she says, that the president will have to learn from her. So of course, as I talk about every single day, lawmakers are so divided on the Hill right now. So the president has a lot on his plate, especially as he has those low poll numbers and just so much that many individuals are just shaking their heads about. So I'm just curious as to how he's going to tackle this. And you know what? I have a very big front seat right here.
Yeah, you absolutely do. I've been saying throughout the broadcast with just a little bit of envy that you've got the best seat in the House, but we are so thrilled that you, of all people, are there. By the way, just to kind of set the scene here, we are going to hear from the Sergeant at Arms who says the most famous words in the State of the Union here in just a bit. That is William Walker, who will have those duties momentarily. Baker, the guest list here is really interesting. We were talking earlier today about Frances Haugen, the former Facebook employee turned whistleblower, who is expected to be in attendance tonight. There will also be a 7th grade teacher alongside the First Lady, who is a diabetes advocate. And of course, as Ariel mentioned early in the show, the Ukrainian ambassador to the U.S., Oksana Markarova, who, of course, just as recently as just yesterday, asked congressional lawmakers for more weapons, more humanitarian aid. There is a lot of messaging and importance and power to whom the White House chooses to be guests at, right?
Absolutely, JD. And don't forget, one of the other big guests that's going to be part of the First Lady's group that she has today. You mentioned Frances Haugen. One's going to be Pat Gelsinger, the CEO of Intel. And that one's significant because that, no doubt, is going to segue into President Biden touting about the economy and inflation. Intel invested $20 billion in a factory near Columbus, Ohio, where they're only going to be building these chips, because we know there's a massive chip shortage in this country, and it was built by union labor members. So that, no doubt, Pat Gelsinger, the CEO of Intel, going to get a big shout out today. We should also note, JD, the Supreme Court members who are sitting right there in the front. 5 of the 9 Supreme Court justice members are there. You see Brett Kavanaugh, you see Stephen Breyer, Amy Coney Barrett, Chief Justice John Roberts is there, and Elena Kagan is there. Justice Sotomayor is not there. We know Justice Sotomayor has diabetes. That might be one of the reasons, in addition to the COVID masking, as to why she's not there. But Stephen Breyer is sitting right in front of the president, in the front row. This, no doubt, his last State of the Union speech. And let's go in right now to the chamber where they're introducing the president. Like the flag. Joe Biden getting a big introduction. He's, of course, shaking hands. That, of course, one of the big questions we're going to have with no mask mandates. Would the president be shaking hands? Clearly, he hasn't even gotten 2 steps in, and he's already shaking hands already, meeting with members of the House. You see Jerry Nadler, though, from New York. He does have a mask on right now. JD, this is going to be, obviously, we've been mentioning a big speech for the president, but how he addresses the situation, I think, in Ukraine, I think the entire world is going to be watching how the president talks about that, given the fact that just a few days ago, Vladimir Putin basically now put nuclear war on the table here. How does President Biden sort of react to that, given that Ukraine seems to be a big theme tonight with so many members of Congress wearing the Ukrainian national colors here?
And that in and of itself is such a powerful message to the world, because this is not just a speech that's watched by reporters or journalists like ourselves. It's not just a speech that's watched by millions of Americans. This is a speech that's being watched by people around the world. And how powerful is it for members of Congress to say, we are going to wave Ukrainian flags, we are going to wear the colors of the great country and stand in solidarity with the more than 44 million people that call Ukraine home. And of course, I think the hearts and minds of everyone here in Washington are with the Ukrainian people tonight. And you're right here, Baker. I mean, this is not something that, this is not a speech I think Joe Biden wants to be focused on geopolitics or on foreign policy, because no president ever just wants to focus his State of the Union just on an issue like that. But if we still have Megan Pratt, though, I still want to bring in this idea of people watching the speech. Megan, since you're down there in Texas, if we still have you here, Megan, have you seen any suggestion that people where you are in Austin are gearing up to watch this speech here as we get the president beginning to speak momentarily?
It's funny, JD. I looked for a watch party when I was coming down here to see if we could hit one up, talk to some people, and I couldn't find one, even at the University of Texas, which is just right around the corner. And I think that that's just kind of people are a little bit tired of politics sometimes, and they just take a break from it, which is absolutely fine with me. But it's a big night, definitely a big night for President Biden.
All right, House Speaker.
The President of the United States.
All right, and of course, this is going to be the first of many on-your-feet applause lines for the president. Of course, that is largely, in fact, among other things, what the State of the Union is known for. As much as nearly a full half hour of the preceding, of the next hour and a half or so that you'll see will be people on their feet clapping for the president. This is the first of many. It does appear as if the president is set to begin his remarks. Let's listen into the House chamber on Capitol Hill.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you. Please. Thank you so much. Madam Speaker, Madam Vice President, our First Lady and Second Gentleman, members of Congress and the Cabinet, Justice of the Supreme Court, my fellow Americans. Last year, COVID-19 kept us apart. This year, we're finally together again. Tonight, we meet as Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, but most importantly, as Americans, with the duty to one another, to America, to the American people, to the Constitution, and an unwavering resolve that freedom will always triumph over tyranny. Thank you. 6 days ago, Russia's Vladimir Putin sought to shake the very foundations of the free world, thinking he could make it bend to his menacing ways. But he badly miscalculated. He thought he could roll into Ukraine and the world would roll over. Instead, he met with a wall of strength he never anticipated or imagined. He met the Ukrainian people. From President Zelensky to every Ukrainian, their fearlessness, their courage, their determination literally inspires the world. Groups of citizens blocking tanks with their bodies, everyone from students to retirees to teachers, turned soldiers defending their homeland. And in this struggle, President Zelensky said in his speech to the European Parliament, "Light will win over darkness." The Ukrainian ambassador to the United States is here tonight, sitting with the First Lady. Let each of us, if you're able to stand and send an unmistakable signal to the world of Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. She's bright, she's strong, and she's resolved. Yes, we, the United States of America, stand with the Ukrainian people. Throughout our history, we've learned this lesson. When dictators do not pay a price for their aggression, they cause more chaos. They keep moving, and the cost, the threats to America and America to the world keeps rising. That's why the NATO alliance was created, to secure peace and stability in Europe after World War II. The United States is a member, along with 29 other nations. It matters. American diplomacy matters. American resolve matters. Putin's latest attack on Ukraine was premeditated and totally unprovoked. He rejected repeated efforts at diplomacy. He thought the West and NATO wouldn't respond. He thought he could divide us at home, in this chamber, in this nation. He thought he could divide us in Europe as well. But Putin was wrong. We are ready. We are united, and that's what we did. We stayed united. We prepared extensively and carefully. We spent months building coalitions of other freedom-loving nations in Europe and the Americas, from America to the Asian and African continents, to confront Putin. Like many of you, I spent countless hours unifying our European allies. We shared with the world in advance what we knew Putin was planning and precisely how he would try to falsify and justify his aggression. We countered Russia's lies with the truth. And now that he's acted, the free world is holding him accountable. along with 27 members of the European Union, including France, Germany, Italy, as well as countries like the United Kingdom, Canada, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and many others, even Switzerland, are inflicting pain on Russia and supporting the people of Ukraine. Putin is now isolated from the world more than he has ever been. Together, along with our allies, we are right now enforcing powerful economic sanctions. We're cutting off Russia's largest banks from the international financial system, preventing Russia's central bank from defending the Russian ruble, making Putin's $630 billion war fund worthless. We're choking Russia's access to technology that will sap its economic strength and weaken its military for years to come. Tonight, I say to the Russian oligarchs and the corrupt leaders who bilked billions of dollars off this violent regime, no more. The United States, I mean it. The United States Department of Justice is assembling a dedicated task force to go after the crimes of the Russian oligarchs. We're joining with European allies to find and seize their yachts, their luxury apartments, their private jets. We're coming for your ill-begotten gains. And tonight, I'm announcing that we will join our allies in closing off American airspace to all Russian flights, further isolating Russia and adding additional squeeze on their economy. He has no idea what's coming. The ruble has already lost 30% of its value. The Russian stock market has lost 40% of its value, and trading remains suspended. The Russian economy is reeling, and Putin alone is the one to blame. Together with our allies, we're providing support to the Ukrainians in their fight for freedom. Military assistance, economic assistance, humanitarian assistance. We're giving more than $1 billion of direct assistance to Ukraine, and will continue to aid the Ukrainian people as they defend their country and help ease their suffering. But let me be clear, our forces are not engaged and will not engage in the conflict with Russian forces in Ukraine. Our forces are not going to Europe to fight Ukraine, but to defend our NATO allies in the event that Putin decides to keep moving west. For that purpose, we have mobilized American ground forces, air squadrons, ship deployments to protect NATO countries including Poland, Romania, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And as I've made crystal clear, the United States and our allies will defend every inch of territory that is NATO territory with the full force of our collective power. Every single inch. And we're clear-eyed. The Ukrainians are fighting back with pure courage. But the next few days, weeks, and months will be hard on them. Putin has unleashed violence and chaos. But while he may make gains on the battlefield, he'll pay a continuing high price over the long run. And a pound of Ukrainian people, the proud, proud people, pound for pound, ready to fight with every inch of energy they have. They've known 30 years of independence, have repeatedly shown that they will not tolerate anyone who tries to take their country backwards.
All right, hello to those of you who are watching along with our continuing coverage here on YouTube. I'm joined by Baker Machado. Light will win over darkness. Baker, my friend, the president is certainly coming out swinging, wanting to convey to the American people what he says his administration is doing to help the people of Ukraine.
Yeah, indeed. And by the way, that light will prevail over darkness, something we heard candidate Biden say a lot, especially when it came to running against former President Donald Trump. Right now, the president, JD, is talking about the U.S. Releasing 60 million barrels barrels of oil from reserves around the world. This, no doubt, is part of the strategic petroleum reserve that we have. This is an attempt to bring down gas prices because we know Russia accounts for 30% of the natural gas that goes into Europe. And as a result of that, that's going to drive gas prices higher, not just in Europe, but across the world. So that was going to be one of the big questions that the president had to address tonight. How are you going to bring down gas prices when one of the biggest oil contributors is in the middle of a giant war right now?
Been interesting to note a few of the things he's had to say has actually brought applause lines from not just Democrats, but from Republicans in the chamber as well. Let's continue to listen in with the president's remarks.
While it shouldn't have taken something so terrible for people around the world to see what's at stake, now everyone sees it clearly. We see the unity among leaders of nations, a more unified Europe, a more unified West. We see unity among the people who are gathering in cities and large crowds around the world, even in Russia, to demonstrate their support for the people of Ukraine. In the battle between democracy and autocracies, democracies are rising to the moment, and the world is clearly choosing the side of peace and security. This is the real test, and it's going to take time. So let us continue to draw inspiration from the iron will of the Ukrainian people. To our fellow Ukrainian Americans who forged the deep bond that connects our two nations, we stand with you. We stand with you. Putin may circle Kyiv with tanks, but he'll never gain the hearts and souls of the Iranian people. He'll never extinguish their love of freedom, and he will never weaken the resolve of the free world. We meet tonight in an America that has lived through two of the hardest years this nation has ever faced. The pandemic has been punishing, and so many families are living paycheck to paycheck, struggling to keep up with the rising cost of food, gas, housing, and so much more. I understand, like many of you did. My dad had to leave his home in Scranton, Pennsylvania to find work. So like many of you, I grew up in a family when the price of food went up, it was felt throughout the family. It had an impact. That's when one of the first things I did as president was fight to pass the American Rescue Plan. Because people were hurting, we needed to act, and we did. Few pieces of legislation have done more at a critical moment in our history to lift us out of a crisis. It fueled our efforts to vaccinate the nation and combat COVID-19, delivered immediate economic relief to tens of millions of Americans. It helped put food on the table. Remember those long lines of cars waiting for hours just to get a box of food put in their trunk? It cut the cost of health care insurance. And as my dad used to say, it gave the people just a little bit of breathing room. Unlike the $2 trillion tax cut passed in the previous administration that benefited the top 1% of Americans, the American Rescue Plan helped working people and left no one behind. Folks, and it worked. It worked. It worked. We created jobs, lots of jobs. In fact, our economy created over 6.5 million new jobs just last year. More jobs in 1 year than ever before in the history of the United States of America. The economy grew at a rate of 5.7 last year, the strongest growth rate in 40 years. And the first step in bringing fundamental change to our economy that hasn't worked for working people in this nation for too long. For the past 40 years, we were told that tax break for those at the top and benefits would trickle down and everyone would benefit. But that trickle-down theory led to a weaker economic growth, lower wages, bigger deficits, and a widening gap between the top and everyone else in nearly a century. Look, Vice President Harris and I ran for office, and I realize we have fundamental disagreements on this, but ran for office with a new economic vision for America. Invest in America, educate Americans, grow the workforce, build the economy from the bottom up and the middle out, not from the top down, because we know when the middle class grows, the poor will way up and the wealthy do very well. America used to have the best roads, bridges, and airports on earth, and now our infrastructure is ranked 13th in the world. We won't be able to compete for the jobs of the 21st century if we don't fix it. That's why it was so important to pass the bipartisan infrastructure law. And I thank my Republican friends who joined to invest and rebuild America, the single biggest investment in history. It was a bipartisan effort, and I want to thank the members of both parties who worked to make it happen. We're done talking about infrastructure weeks. We're now talking about an infrastructure decade. And look, it's going to transform America, to put us on a path to win the economic competition of the 21st century that we face with the rest of the world, particularly China. I've told Xi Jinping it's never been a good bet to bet against the American people. We'll create good jobs for millions of Americans, modernizing roads, airports, ports, waterways, all across America. And we'll do it to withstand the devastating effects of climate change and promote environmental justice. We'll build a national network of 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations. Begin to replace the poisonous lead pipes so every child, every American has clean water to drink at home and at school. We're going to provide affordable, high-speed internet for every American, rural, suburban, urban, and tribal communities. 4,000 projects have already been announced. Many of you have announced them in your districts. And tonight, I'm announcing that this year, we will start fixing over 65,000 miles of highway and 1,500 bridges in disrepair. And folks, when we use taxpayers' dollars to rebuild America, we're going to do it by buying America. Buy American products. Support American jobs. The federal government spends about $600 billion a year to keep this country safe and secure. There's been a law on the books for almost a century to make sure taxpayers' dollars support American jobs and businesses. Every administration, Democrat and Republican, says they'll do it, but we're actually doing it. We'll buy America to make sure everything from the deck of an aircraft carrier to the steel on highway guardrails is made in America from beginning to end. All of it. All of it. But folks, to compete for the jobs of the future, we also need a level playing field with China and other competitors. That's why it's so important to pass the Bipartisan Innovation Act sitting in Congress that will make record investments in emerging technologies and American manufacturing. We used to invest almost 2% of our GDP in research and development. We don't now. China is. Let me give you one example why it's so important to pass. If you travel 20 miles east of Columbus, Ohio, you'll find 1,000 empty acres of land. It won't look like much, but if you stop and look closely, you'll see a field of dreams, the ground on which America's future will be built. That's where Intel, the American company that helped build Silicon Valley, is going to build a $20 billion semiconductor megasite, up to 8 state-of-the-art factories in one place. 10,000 new jobs. And in those factories, the average job about $135,000 a year. Some of the most sophisticated manufacturing in the world to make computer chips the size of a fingertip that power the world in everyday lives. From smartphones, technology, the internet, technology is yet to be invented. But that's just the beginning. Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger, who is here tonight, I don't know where Pat is. Pat, there you go, Pat, stand up. Pat came to see me and he told me they're ready to increase their investment from $20 billion to $100 billion. That would be the biggest investment in manufacturing in American history. And all they're waiting for is for you to pass this bill. So let's not wait any longer. Send it to my desk, I'll sign it, and we'll really take off in a big way. And folks, Intel is not alone. There's something happening in America. Just look around and you'll see an amazing story. The rebirth of pride that comes from stamping products made in America. The revitalization of American manufacturing. Companies are choosing to build new factories here when just a few years ago they would have gone overseas. That's what's happening. Ford is investing $11 billion in electric vehicles, creating 11,000 jobs across the country. GM is making the largest investment in its history, $7 billion to build electric vehicles, creating 4,000 jobs in Michigan. All told, 369,000 new manufacturing jobs were created in America last year alone. Folks, powered by people I've met like JoJo Burgess from generations of union steelworkers in Pittsburgh, who's here with us tonight. Where are you, JoJo? There you go. Thanks, buddy. As Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown says, it's time to bury the label Rust Belt. It's time to see what used to be called the Rust Belt become the home of a significant resurgence of manufacturing. And with all the bright spots in our economy, record job growth, higher wages, too many families are struggling to keep up with their bills. Inflation is robbing them of gains they thought otherwise they would be able to feel. I get it. That's why my top priority is getting prices under control. Look, our economy roared back faster than almost anyone predicted. But the pandemic meant that businesses had a hard time hiring enough people because of the pandemic to keep up production in their factories. So you didn't have people making those beams that went into buildings because they were out. The factory was closed. The panic also disrupted the global supply chain. Factories close. When that happens, it takes longer to make goods and get them to the warehouses, to the stores, and prices go up. Look at cars last year. 1/3 of all the inflation was because of automobile sales. There weren't enough semiconductors to make all the cars that people wanted to buy. And guess what? Prices of automobiles went way up, especially used vehicles as well. And so we have a choice. One way to fight inflation is to drive down wages and make Americans poorer. I think I have a better idea to fight inflation. Lower your costs, not your wages. And folks, that means make more cars and semiconductors in America, more infrastructure and innovation in America, more goods moving faster and cheaper in America, more jobs where you can earn a good living in America. Instead of relying on foreign supply chains, let's make it in America. Look, a Economists Economists call this increasing the productive capacity of our economy. I call it building a better America. My plan to fight inflation will lower your costs and lower the deficit. 17 Nobel laureates in economics said my plan will ease long-term inflationary pressures. Top business leaders, and I believe most Americans, support the plan. And here's the plan. First, cut the cost of prescription drugs. We pay more for the same drug produced by the same company in America than any other country in the world. Just look at insulin. 1 in 10 Americans has diabetes. In Virginia, I met a 13-year-old boy, the handsome young man standing up there, Joshua Davis. He and his dad both have type 1 diabetes, which means they need insulin every single day. Insulin costs about $10 a vial to make. That's what it costs the pharmaceutical company. But drug companies charge families like Joshua and his dad up to 30 times that amount. I spoke with Joshua's mom. Imagine what it's like to look at your child who needs insulin to stay healthy and have no idea how in God's name you're going to be able to pay for it. What it does to your family, but what it does to your dignity, your ability to look your child in the eye, to be the parent you expect yourself to be. I really mean to think about that. That's what I think about. You know, yesterday, Joshua's here tonight, but yesterday was his birthday. Happy birthday, buddy, by the way. For Joshua and 200,000 other young people with type 1 diabetes, let's cap the cost of insulin at $35 a month so everyone can afford it. And drug companies will do very, very well, their profit margin. While we're at it, I know we have great disagreements on this floor with this. Let's let Medicare negotiate the price of prescription drugs. They already set the price for VA drugs. Look, the American Rescue Plan is helping millions of families with Affordable Care Act plans to save them $2,400 a year on their health premiums. Let's close the coverage gap and make these savings permanent. And second, let's cut energy costs for families, an average of $500 a year by combating climate change. Let's provide an investment tax credits to weatherize your home and your business, to be energy efficient and get a tax credit for it. Double America's clean energy production in solar, wind, and so much more. Lower the price of electric vehicles, saving another $80 a month that you're not going to have to pay at the pump. Folks, the third thing we can do to change the standard of living for hardworking folks is cut the cost of child care. Cut the cost of child care. Folks, if you live in a major city in America, you pay up to $14,000 a year for child care per child. I was a single dad for 5 years, raising 2 kids. I had a lot of help, though. I had a mom, a dad, a brother, and a sister that really helped. But middle class and working folks shouldn't have to pay more than 7% of their income to care for the young children. My plan would cut the cost of child care in half for most families and help parents, including millions of women who left the workforce during the pandemic because they couldn't afford child care, to be able to get back to work, generating economic growth. But my plan doesn't stop there. It also includes home and long-term care, more affordable housing, pre-K for 3- and 4-year-olds. All these will lower costs to families. And under my plan, nobody, let me say this again, nobody earning less than $400,000 a year will pay an additional penny in new taxes. Not a single penny. I may be wrong, but my guess is if we took a secret ballot in this floor, that we'd all agree that the present tax system ain't fair. We have to fix it. I'm not looking to punish anybody, but let's make corporations and wealthy Americans start paying their fair share. Look, last year, and like Chris Coons and Tom Carper and my distinguished Congresswoman, we come from the land of corporate America. There are more corporations incorporated in America than every other state in America combined. And I still won 36 years in a row. The point is, even they understand they should pay just a fair share. Last year, 55 of the Fortune 500 companies earned $40 billion in profit and paid zero in federal taxes. Now look, it's not fair. That's why I proposed a 15% minimum tax rate for corporations. And that's why in the G7 and other meetings overseas, we're able to put together, I was able to be somewhat helpful, 130 countries agree on a global minimum tax rate. So companies can't get out of paying their taxes at home by shipping jobs and factories overseas. It'll raise billions of dollars. That's why I propose closing loopholes for the very wealthy who pay a lower tax rate than a teacher and a firefighter. So that's my plan, but we'll go in more detail later. We will grow the economy, lower the cost of families. So what are we waiting for? Let's get this done. We all know we've got to make changes. Folks, and while you're at it, confirm my nominees for the Federal Reserve, which plays a critical role in fighting inflation. My plan will not only lower costs and give families a fair shot, it will lower the deficit. The previous administration not only ballooned the deficit with those tax cuts for the very wealthy and corporations, it undermined the watchdogs, the job of those to keep pandemic relief funds being wasted. Remember we had those debates about whether or not those watchdogs should be able to see every day how much money was being spent, where was it going to the right place? But in my administration, the watchdogs are back. And we're going to go after the criminals who stole billions of relief money meant for small business and millions of Americans. Tonight, I'm announcing that the Justice Department will soon name a chief prosecutor for pandemic fraud. And look, I think we all agree, thank you. By the end of this year, the deficit will be down to less than half of what it was before I took office. The only president ever to cut the deficit by more than $1 trillion in a single year. Lowering your cost also meant demanding more competition. I'm a capitalist, but capitalism without competition is not capitalism. Capitalism without competition is exploitation. It drives up profits. And corporations have to compete. Their profits go up and your prices go up when they don't have to compete. Small businesses and family farmers and ranchers, I need not tell some of my Republican friends from those states. Guess what? You got 4 basic meat packing facilities. That's it. You play with them or you don't get to play at all. And you pay a hell of a lot more. A hell of a lot more because there's only 4. See what's happening with ocean carriers moving goods in and out of America. During the pandemic, about half a dozen or less foreign-owned companies raised prices by as much as 1,000% and made record profits. Tonight, I'm announcing a crackdown on those companies overcharging American businesses and consumers. And folks, And as Wall Street firms take over more nursing homes, quality in those homes has gone down and costs have gone up. That ends on my watch. Medicare is going to set higher standards for nursing homes and make sure your loved ones get the care they deserve and that they inspect and they will look at closely. We're also going to cut costs to keep the economy going strong and giving workers a fair shot, provide more training and apprenticeships, hire them based on skills, not just their degrees. Let's pass the Paycheck Fairness Act and paid leave. Raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour and extend the child tax credit so no one has to raise a family in poverty. Let's increase Pell Grants, increase our historic support for HBCUs, and invest in what Jill, our First Lady who teaches full-time, calls America's best-kept secret, community colleges. Look, let's pass the PRO Act. When a majority of workers want to form a union, they shouldn't be able to be stopped. When we invest in our workers and we build an economy from the bottom up and the middle out together, we can do something we haven't done in a long time, build a better America. For more than 2 years, COVID has impacted every decision in our lives and the life of this nation. And I know you're tired, frustrated, and exhausted. That doesn't even count the close to 1 million people who sit at a dining room table or a kitchen table and look at an empty chair because they lost somebody. But I also know this, because of the progress we've made, because of your resilience and the tools that we have been provided by this Congress, tonight I can say we're moving forward safely back to more normal routines. We've reached a new moment in the fight against COVID-19, where severe cases are down to a level not seen since July of last year. Just a few days ago, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention issued a new mask guidelines. Under the new guidelines, most Americans and most of the country can now go mask-free. And based on projections, more of the country will reach a point across the next couple of weeks. And thanks to the progress we've made in the past year, COVID-19 no longer need control our lives. I know some are talking about living with COVID-19, but tonight I say that we never will just accept living with COVID-19. We'll continue to combat the virus as we do other diseases. And because this virus mutates and spreads, we have to stay on guard. And here are 4 common sense steps as we move forward safely, in my view. First, stay protected with vaccines and treatments. We know how incredibly effective vaccines are. If you're vaccinated and boosted, you have the highest degree of protection. We'll never give up on vaccinating more Americans. Now, I know parents with kids under 5 are eager to see their vaccines authorized for their children. Scientists are working hard to get that done. We'll be ready with plenty of vaccines if and when they do. We're all ready. We are also ready with antiviral treatments. If you get COVID-19, the Pfizer pill reduces your chances of ending up in the hospital by 90%. I've ordered more pills than anyone in the world has. Pfizer is working overtime to get us 1 million pills this month and more than double that next month. And now we're launching the Test to Treat initiative. So people can get tested at a pharmacy, and if they prove positive, receive the antiviral pills on the spot at no cost. And folks, if you're immunocompromised or have some other vulnerability, we have treatments and free high-quality masks. We're leaving no one behind or ignoring anyone's needs as we move forward. On testing, we've made hundreds of millions of tests available, and you can order them for free to your doorstep. And we've already ordered free tests. If you already ordered free tests tonight, I'm announcing you can order another group of tests. Go to covidtest.gov starting next week, and you can get more tests. Second, we must prepare for new variants. Over the past, we've gotten much better at detecting new variants. If necessary, we'll be able to develop new vaccines within 100 days instead of maybe months or years. And if Congress provides the funds we need, we'll have new stockpiles of tests, masks, pills ready if needed. I can't promise a new variant won't come, but I can promise you we'll do everything within our power to be ready if it does. Third, we can end the shutdown of schools and businesses. We have the tools we need. It's time for America to get back to work and fill our great downtowns again with people. People working from home can feel safe and begin to return to their offices. We're doing that here in the federal government. The vast majority of federal workers will once again work in person. Our schools are open. Let's keep it that way. Our kids need to be in school. With 75% of adult Americans fully vaccinated and hospitalizations down by 77%, most Americans can remove their masks and stay in the classroom and move forward safely. We achieved this because we provided free vaccines, treatments, tests, and masks. Of course, continuing this costs money, so I'll not surprise you. I'll be back to see you all. And I'm going to soon send a request to Congress. The vast majority of Americans have used these tools and may want again. We may need them again. So I expect Congress, and I hope you'll pass that quickly. Fourth, we'll continue vaccinating the world. We've sent 475 million vaccine doses to 112 countries, more than any nation on earth. We won't stop because you can't build a wall high enough to keep out a vaccine. The vaccine can stop the spread of these diseases. You know, we've lost so much in COVID-19. Time with one another. The worst of all, the loss of life. Let's use this moment to reset. So stop looking at COVID as a partisan dividing line. See it for what it is, a god-awful disease. Let's stop seeing each other as enemies and start seeing each other for who we are, fellow Americans. Look, we can't change how divided we've been. It was a long time in coming. But we can change how to move forward on COVID-19 and other issues that we must face together. I recently visited New York City Police Department days after the funerals of Officer Wilbur Mora and his partner, Officer Jason Rivera. They were responding to a 9/11 call when a man shot and killed them with a stolen gun. Officer Mora was 27 years old. Officer Rivera was 22 years old. Both Dominican Americans who grew up in the same streets that they later chose to patrol as police officers. I spoke with their families, and I told them that we were forever in debt for their sacrifices and will carry on their mission to restore the trust and safety of every community deserves. Like some of you that have been around for a while, I've worked with you on these issues for a long time. I know what works: investigating crime prevention and community policing, cops who walk the beat, who know the neighborhood, and who can restore trust and safety. Let's not abandon our streets or choose between safety and equal justice. Let's come together and protect our communities, restore trust, and hold law enforcement accountable. That's why the Justice Department has required body cameras, banned chokeholds, and restricted no-knock warrants for its officers. That's why the American Rescue Plan that you all provided $350 billion that cities, states, and counties can use to hire more police, invest in more proven strategies. Proven strategies like community violence interruption, trusted messengers, breaking the cycle of violence and trauma, and giving young people some hope. We should all agree the answer is not to defund the police, it's to fund the police. Fund them. Fund them. Fund them with resources and training. Resources and training they need to protect our communities. I ask Democrats and Republicans alike to pass my budget and keep our neighborhoods safe. And we'll do everything in my power to crack down on gun trafficking of ghost guns that you can buy online, assemble at home, no serial numbers, can't be traced. I ask Congress to pass proven measures to reduce gun violence. Pass universal background checks. Why should anyone on the terrorist list be able to purchase a weapon? Why? Why? And folks, ban assault weapons with high-capacity magazines that hold up to 100 rounds. You think the deer are wearing Kevlar vests? Look, repeal the liability shield that makes gun manufacturers the only industry in America that can't be sued. The only one. Imagine had we done that with the tobacco manufacturers. These laws don't infringe on the Second Amendment. They save lives. The most fundamental right in America is the right to vote and have it counted. And look, it's under assault. In state after state, new laws have been passed, not only to suppress the vote, we've been there before, but to subvert the entire election. We can't let this happen. Tonight I call on the Senate to pass the Freedom to Vote Act, pass the John Lewis Act, Voting Rights Act. And while you're at it, pass the Disclose Act so Americans know who's funding our elections. Look, tonight, I'd like to honor someone who dedicated his life to serve this country. Justice Breyer, an Army veteran, constitutional scholar, retiring Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Justice Breyer, thank you for your service. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I mean it. Get up, stand, let them see you. Thank you. And we all know, no matter what your ideology, we all know one of the most serious constitutional responsibility a president has is nominating someone to serve on the United States Supreme Court. As I did 4 days ago, I've nominated the Circuit Court of Appeals, Ketanji Brown Jackson, one of our nation's top legal minds, who continue in Justice Breyer's legacy of excellence. A former top litigator in private practice, a former federal public defender, from a family of public school educators and police officers. She's a consensus builder. Since she's been nominated, she's received a broad range of support, including the Fraternal Order of Police and former judges supported by Democrats and Republicans. Folks, if we're to advance liberty and justice, we need to secure our border and fix the immigration system. And as you might guess, I think we can do both. At our border, we've installed new technology like cutting-edge scanners to better detect drug smuggling. We've set up joint patrols with Mexico and Guatemala to catch more human traffickers. We're putting in place dedicated immigration judges in a significant larger number so families fleeing persecution and violence can have their cases heard faster, and those who don't legitimately hear can be sent back. We're screening, we're securing commitments and supporting partners in South and Central America to host more refugees and secure their own borders. We can do all this while keeping lit the torch of liberty that has led a generation of immigrants to this land, my forebears and many of yours. Provide a pathway to citizenship for dreamers, those with temporary status, farm workers, essential workers. Revise our laws so businesses have workers they need and families don't wait decades to reunite. It's not only the right thing to do, it's economically smart thing to do. That's why the immigration reform is supported by everyone from labor unions to religious leaders to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Let's get it done once and for all. Folks, advancing liberty and justice also requires protecting the rights of women. The constitutional right affirmed by Roe v. Wade, standing precedent for half a century, is under attack as never before. If you want to go forward, not backwards, we must protect access to health care, preserve a woman's right to choose, and continue to advance maternal health care for all Americans. And folks, for our LGBTQ plus Americans, let's finally get the Bipartisan Equality Act to my desk. The onslaught of state laws targeting transgender Americans and their families, it's simply wrong. And I said last year, especially to our younger transgender Americans, I'll always have your back as your president so you can be yourself and reach your God-given potential. Folks, as I've just demonstrated, while it often appears we do not agree, and that we do agree on a lot more things than we acknowledge. I signed 80 bipartisan bills into law last year, from preventing government shutdowns, to protecting Asian Americans from still too common hate crimes, to reforming military justice, and will soon be strengthening the Violence Against Women Act that I first wrote 3 decades ago. And it's important. It's important for us to show the nation we can come together and do big things. So tonight I'm offering a unity agenda for the nation. 4 big things we can do together, in my view. First, beat the opioid epidemic. There's so much we can do. Increase funding for prevention, treatment, harm reduction, and recovery. Get rid of outdated rules and stop doctors prescribing treatments. Stop the flow of illicit drugs by working with state and local law enforcement to go after the traffickers. And if you're suffering from addiction, you should know you're not alone. I believe in recovery, and I celebrate the 23 million Americans in recovery. Second, let's take on mental health, especially among our children whose lives and education have been turned upside down. The American Rescue Plan gave schools money to hire teachers and help students make up for lost learning. I urge every parent to make sure your school does just that. They have the money. We can all play a part. Sign up to be a tutor or a mentor. Children were also struggling before the pandemic: bullying, violence, trauma, and the harms of social media. As Frances Haugen, who is here tonight with us, has shown, we must hold social media platforms accountable for the national experiment they're conducting on our children for profit. Folks, thank you. Thank you for the courage you showed. It's time to strengthen privacy protections, ban targeted advertising to children, demand tech companies stop collecting personal data on our children, and let's get all Americans the mental health services they need. More people can turn for help and full parity between physical and mental health care if we treat it that way in our insurance. Look, the third piece of that agenda is support our veterans. Veterans are the backbone and the spine of this country. They're the best of us. I've always believed that we have a sacred obligation to equip those we send to war and care for those in their family when they come home. My administration is providing assistance in job training, housing, and now helping lower-income veterans get VA care debt-free. And our troops in Iraq and Afghanistan have faced many dangers. one being stationed at bases breathing in toxic smoke from burn pits. Many of you have been there. I've been in and out of Iraq and Afghanistan over 40 times. These burn pits that incinerate waste, the waste of war, medical and hazardous material, jet fuel, and so much more. And they come home, many of the world's fittest and best trained warriors in the world. Never the same. Headaches, numbness, dizziness. A cancer that would put them in a flag-draped coffin. I know. One of those soldiers was my son, Major Bo Biden. I don't know for sure if the burn pit that he lived near, that his hooch was near in Iraq and earlier than that in Kosovo, is the cause of his brain cancer, the disease of so many other troops. But I am committed to find out everything we can, committed to military families like Danielle Robinson from Ohio, the widow of Sergeant First Class Heath Robinson. He was born a soldier, Army National Guard, combat medic in Kosovo and Iraq, stationed near Baghdad, just yards from burn pits the size of football fields. Danielle is here with us tonight. They love going to Ohio State football games. And they love building Legos with their daughter. But cancer from prolonged exposure to burn pits ravaged Heath's lungs and body. Danielle says Heath was a fighter to the very end. He didn't know how to stop fighting, and neither did she. Through her pain, she found purpose to demand that we do better. Tonight, Danielle, we are going to do better. The VA is pioneering new ways of linking toxic exposure to disease, already helping more veterans get benefits. And tonight, I'm announcing we're expanding eligibility to veterans suffering from 9 respiratory cancers. I'm also calling on Congress to pass a law to make sure veterans devastated by toxic exposure in Iraq and Afghanistan finally get the benefits and the comprehensive health care they deserve. And fourth and last, let's end cancer as we know it. This is personal. This is personal to me and to Jill and to Kamala and so many of you. So many of you have lost someone you love. Husband, wife, son, daughter, mom, dad. Cancer is the #2 cause of death in America, second only to heart disease. Last month, I announced the plan to supercharge the cancer moonshot that President Obama asked me to lead 6 years ago. Our goal is to cut cancer death rates by at least 50% over the next 25 years, and I think we can do better than that. Turn cancers from death sentences into treatable diseases. More support for patients and their families. To get there, I call on Congress to fund what I called ARPA-H, Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, patterned after DARPA and the Defense Department, projects that led in DARPA to the internet, GPS, and so much more that make our forces more safer and be able to wage war with more clarity. ARPA will have a singular purpose: to drive breakthroughs in cancer, Alzheimer's and diabetes, and more. A unity agenda for the nation. We can do these things. It's within our power, and I don't see a partisan edge to any one of those 4 things. My fellow Americans, tonight, we've gathered in this sacred space, a citadel of democracy, in this Capitol, Generation after generation of Americans have debated great questions amid great strife and have done great things. We fought for freedom, expanded liberty, debated totalitarianism and terror. We built the strongest, freest, and most prosperous nation the world has ever known. Now is the hour, our moment of responsibility, our test of resolve and conscience, of history itself. It is in this moment that our character of this generation is formed. Our purpose is found. Our future is forged. Well, I know this nation. We'll meet the test, protect freedom and liberty, expand fairness and opportunity, and we will save democracy. As hard as those times have been, I'm more optimistic about America today than I've been my whole life, because I see the future that's within our grasp, because I know there's simply nothing beyond our capacity. We're the only nation on earth that has always turned every crisis we've faced into an opportunity. The only nation that can be defined by a single word: possibilities. So on this night, on our 245th year as a nation, I've come to report on the state of the nation, the State of the Union. And my report is this: the State of the Union is strong because you, the American people, are strong. We are stronger today. We are stronger today than we were a year ago. And we'll be stronger a year from now than we are today. This is our moment to meet and overcome the challenges of our time. And we will, as one people, one America, the United States of America. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you. Go get him.
So on this night in our 245th year as a nation, I have come to report the state of our union is strong because you, the American people, are strong. Those, the closing sentiments from the nation's commander-in-chief, President Joe Biden, wrapping up there just moments ago, his first official State of the Union. Many themes, many issues, geopolitics front and center for the president, addressing not just members of Congress, not just Americans, but quite frankly, people all over this globe. Welcome back to the broadcast. That was President Joe Biden's first official State of the Union, wrapping up just moments ago. And just like before the broadcast, I am joined now by my colleagues across the country covering several major politics events as they are unfolding. We do have my good friend Ariel Hickson holding things down on Capitol Hill. We will check in with her in a moment, as we will for Megan Pratt. She's keeping tabs on the Texas primary from the Lone Star State Capitol in the great city of Austin. And of course, my good friend Baker Machado in the Big Apple. Baker, I'm going to start with you. We always say in the cable news business after things like this, your key takeaways. What are your takeaways? But that's exactly what I need to ask you. What are your takeaways from the thing that stood out to you for what is certainly a difficult challenge, a tall task for the president to address the world tonight?
Absolutely, no doubt, JD. And we talked about that in the early parts of this show tonight, sort of the fine line that the president had to walk tonight with the myriad of things that he's dealing with COVID, rapid inflation, the ongoing situation in Ukraine. And the president really harping on that today, saying almost as optimistic as we've seen him before, saying as hard as those times have been, I'm more optimistic about America today than I've been my whole life, which sort of encapsulated a lot of the themes that we heard from the president tonight. He mentioned earlier on, maybe about a quarter of the speech was dedicated to Ukraine. We mentioned tonight that he had to scrap the original parts of this speech tonight and rewrite parts of it because of the ongoing situation there. He's saying tonight that no longer will Russia be able to use the United States airspace at all, and that he's continuing to utilize NATO allies to put more pressure on Vladimir Putin. The other big question tonight, JD, what would the president do regarding the Build Back Better plan, which was supposed to be his key signature social legislative achievement that is stalled in the Senate, mainly dead because of Joe Manchin? It was interesting because he brought up all the sorts of popular provisions about the Build Back Better bill, but never mentioned the Build Back Better bill. He called it, in particular, I call it Building America Better, but he didn't say Build Back Better, which I thought was really interesting tonight, JD.
Yeah, that absolutely is. Let's turn our attention here to Ariel Hickson. If Ariel is standing by over on Capitol Hill, there she is at Emancipation Hall. You were right there, just feet away from all the action. Ariel, what stood out to you from the president's address moments ago?
You know, what stood out to me, JD, was just the way that he tackled COVID-19. That's been on everyone's mind since April of 2020. And the fact that he talked about how far we've come since first encountering the virus was huge. He talked about the power of vaccinations, the fact that they got those vaccination rates much higher than they first anticipated, and how that's affected the economy going forward. He also talked about the Pfizer pill and how that reduces the chances of ending up in the hospital by 90%. But I think one big point here was the idea that he didn't want to have COVID bring us further apart, but come together, not make that something that's a partisan issue. Take a listen.
Let's use this moment to reset. So stop looking at COVID as a partisan dividing line. See it for what it is, a god-awful disease. Let's stop seeing each other as enemies and start seeing each other for who we are, fellow Americans. We can't change how divided we've been. It was a long time in coming. But we can change how to move forward on COVID-19 and other issues that we must face together.
You heard directly from the president there saying, let's not view this as a god-awful disease that's going to divide us. And you know what, that is where he kind of indirectly was talking about misinformation when it comes to COVID-19, something that the Biden administration has been really looking into going forward because of the fact that their focus since the beginning of time, since he first stepped into the shoes of being president of the United States, was tackling COVID-19. So his process of talking about moving from a pandemic to an endemic was something that I was very much paying attention to there, JD.
Yeah, absolutely, Ariel. I'm going to bring back in Baker Machado. Nope, absolutely not. I'm going to go to Megan Pratt. She is there. And there we go. We have Megan. Megan, you've been listening to the speech from afar, which I know is no easy task when you are a reporter in the field or a correspondent. You don't necessarily always get to see everything that happens, but oftentimes it gives you a bit more perspective than the rest of us who did watch it. Megan, what stood out to you there in Austin tonight?
You make a good point, JD, which is that listening is sometimes better or certainly different than watching. So I didn't have any of sort of the applause lines. I didn't see anyone stand up or not stand up. I do know from, of course, our reporting here that there was a lot of bipartisan consensus on the issue of Ukraine. Lots of standing ovations, lots of applause lines that got support from both sides of the aisle. That is unsurprising, right? But part of the president's job tonight, JD, was making sure that the American people understand that the U.S. is committed to Ukraine, but only to a point. And I want you to listen to part of what he said specifically about American troops. Take a look.
Our forces are not engaged and will not engage in the conflict with Russian forces in Ukraine. Our forces are not going to Europe to fight Ukraine, but to defend our NATO allies in the event that Putin decides to keep moving west.
This is the main fear, I think, for the American people when it comes to supporting Ukraine is what is our line? What is our red line of stopping our support? Well, the red line for stopping support to Ukraine is stepping American boots on the ground. That doesn't mean that Americans won't go fight there. We know Ukraine has opened its doors wide for anyone who wants to come fight as part of their sort of foreign legion. But U.S. official military operations, they are not going to take place in Ukraine. And that is final. We've heard it from the president routinely, regularly, and he even used tonight's major platform to make that point as well, JD. So I think that that is something that should give some reassurance to the American people about what's next in the Ukrainian-Russian conflict.
Thanks a lot there, Megan. Now, Baker, one thing that the president did not at least explicitly make a reference to, which actually kind of surprised me, was the attack on January 6th. I mean, there he is inside the actual chamber that came under assault by those violent insurrectionists more than a year ago. And I thought that would be an opportunity to either strike a tone of bipartisanship or to further underscore the attack on our own domestic democracy that it was back then. But I'm curious if any thoughts about things perhaps that the president that you thought he might work into this very long speech that he did not, or what else is top of mind for you?
Even a mention about the insurrection, JD, the president didn't even mention whatsoever. The president did say the Justice Department, he has created a task force that is going to look into fraud regarding the pandemic, which I did think that was pretty interesting. One other thing, and I think this is going to parlay perfectly into what we're going to see from Kim Reynolds, the governor of Iowa, and her response tonight. The president, when he's talking about COVID tonight, I want to play a quick clip from what the president said regarding this, because I think it's going to be important regarding the next speech here in a second. Take a listen.
It's time for America to get back to work and fill our great downtowns again with people. People working from home can feel safe and begin to return to their offices.
JD, I think that's really important because, as we mentioned in our pre-show, there's a new Monmouth University poll out there that says 70% of Americans have now agreed that COVID is here to stay and want to move on with their lives. That's significant because the person that is giving the Republican response here in just a few minutes is the governor of Iowa, Kim Reynolds, and she is definitely going to hit on the fact that she kept schools and a lot of businesses open during the pandemic, because right now, even though 2024 is a very long time away from right now, all Republicans, from Ron DeSantis to former President Donald Trump to even Kim Reynolds, who we should note is a rumored finalist potentially to be Donald Trump's running mate in 2024, are going to be talking about how Joe Biden did not handle COVID very well. And Ron DeSantis has even gone as far as to say that he would have explicitly changed how he ran Florida during COVID. He wouldn't have shut down as much as he did during COVID, which we should note Florida was open much more than a lot of other states out there. So I think that's important for Democrats to sort of say, COVID is done, at least when it comes to this particular phase, and that we're moving on, and that the visuals of seeing the president, the vice president, and the Speaker of the House without masks on, shaking hands, all of that, is supposed to show us that the new life that we've been waiting for 2 years is finally here.
Yeah, and you talked about that with our friend Francesca Chamber before the speech tonight, that perhaps Democrats, after a long while, put legitimate public health concerns aside, recognizing that perhaps this is not as much of a winning issue, these heavy COVID restrictions, as Democrats had been sort of aligning themselves with for quite some time. Baker, I also want to get your take here, because it's not just Governor Reynolds and not just the Republican in Iowa. We've got not one, not two, but dare I say 3 different Democrats that are giving their own responses. Josh Gottheimer, Congressman Colin Allred will give the Congressional Black Caucus response. And of course, Representative Rashida Tlaib will give the more progressive or the Workers' Family Party official response. Does that kind of underscore any sense of unity that Democrats have? Look, the worst open secret here in Washington is that more than likely Democrats are in, come November, for, as former President Obama referred to it as, a shellacking in the midterms. Is this not the time for the Democratic Party to try to be as united as possible? Instead, you got high-profile members that are now branching off to give their own sort of rebuttal, or at least response to what the party standard bearer had to say.
You mentioned Josh Gottheimer here. By the way, he is doing a bipartisan response with a Republican member of the House as well later tonight. But Josh Gottheimer, when was asked about Rashida Tlaib's progressive response later on, he said that's essentially like keying your car and slashing your tires, is what he had said. We should note this isn't the first time there has been a progressive response. Back during the Trump administration, there was a Democratic response, and then there was a progressive response. Bernie Sanders at one point even gave the progressive response here. I also don't know, it also depends on how many people tune in to watch the progressive response. But one thing you have to note, and this is going to be important to watch in these midterms coming up, do progressives feel emboldened here based off of what's happened during the Biden administration? Because if you think about it, Joe Biden, yes, on paper is a moderate, and a lot of the people that he has in his cabinet and have worked alongside him are moderates. Progressives are upset that a lot of the progressive agenda was stalled by moderates like Joe Manchin, by Kyrsten Sinema. And do progressives feel more emboldened heading into the midterms to maybe take back some of those seats that maybe moderates have, and maybe progressives feel emboldened come the midterms? I think that's going to be an interesting question. Because look, Rashida Tlaib, she's in a district that she's going to win by 80% of the vote. So she doesn't have to worry too much about anybody taking her out of office here.
Can't help but notice a few of the high-profile Democrats, longtime House members. Barbara Lee, of course, famously the lone vote against war after 9/11. You see her there on the right side of your screen. The president also speaking there with Ohio Representative Marcy Kaptur, one of the longest serving members of the House, there moments ago. Of course, this is the opportunity for a lot of lawmakers to try and get a little bit of face time with the president.
By the way,
yeah, Baker.
Marcy Kaptur, interesting, because we were talking about gerrymandering at the early parts of this show, and so far over 30 Democrats have announced that they're retiring heading into the midterms. Many of them are because of their districts getting redistricted to become a little bit more conservative. Marcy Kaptur, as you mentioned, one of the longest serving members of the House, at least in the state of Ohio, her district got heavily gerrymandered. Her district became much more conservative. If anything, she basically would be on the front lines for Republicans to try to take back that seat. But instead of retire, Marcy Kaptur's staying in again. So potentially Marcy Kaptur will be somebody to watch to see if she'll be able to keep that House seat come November.
I know Representative Kaptur is very proud of the fact the longer that you serve in Congress, the better your office location is. And I will say, having interviewed Representative Kaptur from her office, she truly is one of the best views of the Capitol Dome there from the Rayburn House office building. But that's what you get to do when you've been in Congress for many, many years. Your office assignment gets a bit better and better. Someone else who knows that very well is my colleague, and I've covered Capitol Hill and the campaign trail with her for a long time, Megan Pratt. Megan, what else is standing up to you as we were watching the president shake a few hands, slap a few backs, say hello on his eventual way out of the House chamber?
Well, you know, if you're talking gerrymandering, I would like to be involved. One of the things I want to mention about Ohio in particular, because their new map is pretty gerrymandered, Republicans have control of that state. Their Snake on a Lake district, which is one of the funniest districts that's literally just a sliver there on one of the Great Lakes, that is one of the famous most gerrymandered districts in modern history. But we were talking about midterm elections, right? And one of the things that was a huge part of the shellacking that President Obama took is that was a redistricting year, right? This year's not. So that makes a difference. But the most important election of our lifetime really was 2010. So the weight of this midterm election is going to be bearing on Biden. You have to believe that. Now, as for the speech itself, I sort of keyed in at the end on some of these sort of tidbits we heard. A little bit about immigration here, a little bit about military here, and a little bit about abortion. I think it's very key. This is a huge issue for 2022. It will be a voting issue. Mark my words. I am standing in Texas where you cannot obtain an abortion after about 6 weeks of pregnancy anywhere in the state. This is the second largest state in the entire country. That is a big deal, right? So abortion is going to be very much on the ballot, especially depending on how the Supreme Court decides that case later this year. So abortion certainly stuck out, but so did the Equality Act. And like I said, these are tidbit things, right? The speech was mainly taken up, as rightfully so, by Ukraine and the economy. But abortion making a prominent point for our Irish Catholic president is a big deal. And I also think the Equality Act getting a shout out is a big deal too, because again, I'm in Texas where today there was a massive protest right behind me for trans youth, because this is a state where parents of trans youth are now being investigated in some cases for child abuse. And we saw that revealed today. That first investigation has already kicked off here in the Lone Star State. So certainly conversations about human rights, certainly conversations about what kind of country we want to have, what kind of states we want to be. I think that was really key from this president to take this platform and give those issues the moment, even though they were little teeny tiny moments, the moment that he believed they deserved, JD.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that's interesting to me here, too, as well, Baker, is obviously in a moment like this, you got a lot of partisanship. There are going to be your fair share of sort of applause lines that only Democrats kind of go for. But I think the president also acutely aware of the storyline that Megan is there to cover, which is we do have midterms this year, and the president needs to kind of give quite a bit of talking points that Republicans are going to applaud. And number one is the issue of crime. The president really making sure that he was very clear with his words to say the answer is not to defund the police. The answer is to fund the police, to try and push back against this long-running criticism that all Democrats want to defund the police, which is certainly not true and has never been the position of Joe Biden. And I'm being told we have our colleague Ariel standing by with a Republican member of the House. Ariel, my friend, take it away.
Absolutely. We're joined by Representative Nancy Mace here with Cheddar News. What was your take on the speech today?
Well, for starters, I want to say it was great to be in the chamber with both the Senate and the House, Republicans and Democrats together, to be there tonight, to be with the President of the United States. And the speech was optimistic, and I think that is good energy to see that coming out of the presidency and out of the State of the Union tonight. I think Republicans and Democrats have very similar goals, but our approaches are just so different. And it's how do we meet in the middle? How do we build consensus? How do we work together? And I didn't hear that tonight. And given where we are in our country, the divisions that we have today, the crisis at our border, inflation, the crisis in Eastern Europe with our allies and NATO, their concerns with Russia going into Ukraine, and our concerns as well, and how that's going to affect all of us and our allies and friends and partners around the world. We got to do more to work together, right? And I wanted to hear more of that tonight and what we were going to do to work together to achieve goals together.
Now, we always talk about how lawmakers are so divided on the Hill right now during this particular time because there's so many issues that are just so stressful to the average American. How do you think that we will bridge the gap if that wasn't answered in the speech?
Well, I mean, we've got to work together and we've got to force ourselves to work together. But, in talking about the opioid crisis, for example, you can't fix the opioid crisis without fixing the border. We have tons of fentanyl coming across the border each and every day. Millions of 2 million migrants crossed the border illegally last year. But when you're talking about the opioid crisis again, we haven't done cannabis reform. And there are Republicans and Democrats. I'm one of them that are trying to get it done and do it. Those are serious issues. They need serious solutions, and I'm here to work. And so let's do it together. And I wanted to hear more of that tonight.
And the Republican response is going on pretty much as we speak. What are your thoughts in terms of how they're going to really approach this going forward, and I guess how it's going to be taken in from Democrats on the Hill as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, when talking about some of the price controls, they're talking about government price controls, the pressures they're going to be putting on businesses, it actually will hurt the economy, hurt American jobs. There'll be less money invested into research and R&D and technology and innovation. The free market works when you allow it to work, when there's competition in the marketplace. Those are things. When talking about Ukraine and Russia, I didn't hear how we're going to attack the oil and gas economy that funds Putin's wars. What are we going to do? You have enough natural gas in New York that Europe could use for the next 150 years, and yet we're importing 600,000 barrels a day. Each of one of those barrels is stained with Ukrainian blood. So we need to hit Putin where it hurts. I do like what he said on Ukraine, but let's do more.
And Biden has mentioned in the past that he is tackling what's going on between Russia and Ukraine by putting on these harsh sanctions. That's really his ammo. What do you think about that?
Well, it's a great start, but I feel like we've been leading from behind. We're following Europe's lead rather than they're following ours. I did hear tonight that they're going to ensure that we prohibit Russian airlines in U.S. airspace. I believe that was one of the latest sanctions, but other countries have already done that. Canada to our north has put a moratorium on oil and gas imports from Russia. That's something else that we should be looking at and considering. How do we do something similar, or at least reduce the number of barrels that we have of oil and gas that we import every single day? I mean, we are literally funding Putin's wars with how our regulations have formulated our oil and gas economy here at home as well.
House Representative Nancy Mace, thank you so much for joining us today on Cheddar. Back to you guys in studio.
All right, Ariel Hickson there for us on Capitol Hill alongside Representative Nancy Mace. No big surprise there to hear the Republican of South Carolina talk, among other things, cannabis reform. That has been a big priority. Our amazing colleague Chloe Aiello has reported very closely here over the last year or so about Representative Nancy Mace helping to try and lead the charge here among Republicans to finally prioritize this issue. A lot of members of the GOP have said, hey, when it comes to cannabis or marijuana reform, why are we allowing Democrats to have the upper hand? We need to take the issue more seriously as it pertains to priority. My special thanks there to the representative as well as Ariel. I believe I do have Baker Machado here. Baker, before we had the interview there, you and I were talking about these little moments, these little things that the president was having to say to sort of appease the Republicans in the chamber. Any thoughts that you had or anything you just heard there from Representative Mace a moment ago?
Look, Nancy Mace is in a really difficult position right now in South Carolina. You have the Trump wing of the Republican Party that does not trust her whatsoever and wants her out. So the fact that you had Nancy Mace, a Republican of the House of Representatives, coming out saying that she appreciated the optimistic tone that the president gave in his speech tonight, I almost was sort of floored by, given how polarized our two two parties are right now. But she was absolutely right. The president's speech was optimistic. That was just a stated fact that I thought was really interesting. But Nancy Mace, no doubt, obviously has a lot that she has to deal with when it comes to her particular district here. I want to talk really quickly about what's happening right now in Texas, because this is interesting, because I want to bring Megan into this conversation, because we're seeing, especially in Texas, oh, it looks like we have the GOP response. Governor Kim Reynolds of Iowa looks like she's about to go to her podium right now. So let's go live right now to the response.
Madre y abuela de un niño de 11 que está preocupada de que el país va en un mal camino. Después de un año de su presidencia, en vez de...
It feels like President Biden and his party have sent us back in time to the late 70s and early 80s, when runaway inflation was hammering families, a violent crime wave was crashing our cities, and the Soviet Army was trying to redraw the world map. Even before taking the oath of office, the president told us that he wanted to, quote, make America respected around the world again, and to unite us here at home. He's failed on both fronts. The disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal did more than cost American lives. It betrayed our allies and emboldened our enemies. North Korea is testing missiles again at an alarming rate. The Speaker of the House recently warned our Olympic athletes not to speak out against China. And now Russia has launched an unprovoked, full-scale military invasion of Ukraine, an attack on democracy, freedom, and the rule of law. Now all Americans must stand united in solidarity with the brave people of Ukraine as they courageously defend their country against Putin's tyranny, as they fight for their freedom. But we shouldn't ignore what happened in the run-up to Putin's invasion, waiving sanctions on Russian pipelines while eliminating oil production here at home, focusing on political correctness rather than military readiness, reacting to world events instead of driving them. Weakness on the world stage has a cost, and the president's approach to foreign policy has consistently been too little, too late. It's time for America to once again project confidence. It's time to be decisive. It's time to lead. But we can't project strength abroad if we're weak at home. And that's what I want to discuss with you tonight. The president and Democrats in Congress have spent the last year either ignoring the issues facing Americans or making them worse. They were warned that spending trillions would lead to soaring inflation. They were told that their anti-energy policies would send gas prices to new heights, but they plowed ahead anyway, raising the price at the pump by 50% and pushing inflation to a 40-year high. 4 decades ago, when our nation was last reeling from inflation, I was a young working mom just starting out. My husband, Kevin, worked days while I watched our girls, and then we would literally switch. We would pass in the yard as he was coming home, and I was leaving to work evenings at the local grocery store. From across that checkout counter, I saw the pain of inflation on my neighbors' faces. I saw what happens when prices rise faster than wages. The Biden administration believes inflation is a, quote, high-class problem. I can tell you, it's an everybody problem. I saw moms and dads' paychecks buy them less and less. I watched working people choose which essentials to take home and which ones to leave behind. And now President Biden's decisions have a whole new generation feeling that same pain. When I took the oath of office 5 years ago, I promised Iowans that I would never lose sight of who I was working for, that I wouldn't become detached from the problems they were facing, from the problems that I had faced myself. But you don't have to check groceries to see what high inflation does to people. You just need to step outside of the DC bubble. Talk to Americans about what's on their mind. Ask them, what are your concerns? What keeps you up at night? And they'll tell you. And I can tell you what's not on that list. They won't tell you that spending trillions more and bankrupting their children is the answer to their problems. They won't tell you that we should be paying people not to work. And they certainly won't tell you that we should give billions in tax giveaways to millionaires and billionaires in Democrat-controlled states like California, New York, and New Jersey. But that's what the Biden administration has been pushing for over the last year. And that's all part of Build Back Better. Thankfully, the president's agenda didn't pass because even members of his own party said enough is enough. Well, the American people share that view. Enough is enough. And it's not just with D.C. spending. Americans are tired of a political class trying to remake this country into a place where an elite few tell everyone else what they can and cannot say, what they can and cannot believe. They're tired of people pretending the way to end racism is by categorizing everybody by their race. They're tired of politicians who tell parents they should sit down, be silent, and let government control their kids' education and future. Frankly, they are tired of the theater, where politicians do one thing when the cameras are rolling and another when they believe you can't see them. Where governors and mayors enforce mandates but don't follow them. Where elected leaders tell their citizens to stay home while they sneak off to Florida for sun and fun. Where they demand that your child wear a mask, but they go maskless. So you've heard the excuses. They were just holding their breath. But it's the American people who are waiting to exhale, waiting for the insanity to stop. We now live in a country where violent crime is out of control. Liberal prosecutors are letting criminals off easy, and many prominent Democrats still want to defund the police. You know, it seems like everything is backwards. The Biden administration requires vaccines for Americans who want to go to work or protect this country, but not for migrants who illegally cross the border. The Department of Justice treats parents like domestic terrorists, but looters and shoplifters roam free. The American people are left to feel like they're the enemy. This is not the same country it was a year ago. The president tried to paint a different picture tonight, but his actions over the last 12 months don't match the rhetoric. It's not what he promised when he took office. But it doesn't have to be that way. There is an alternative. Across the nation, Republican governors and legislators are showing Americans what conservative leadership looks like, what it means to respect the people we serve, to hear them out, to stand up for them and walk alongside them. We know that our problems require bold action, but we also know that bold action doesn't have to mean government action. It's Americans making their own decisions for their own families and future. Republican governors face the same COVID-19 virus head-on. But we honored your freedoms and saw right away that lockdowns and school closures, they came with their own significant cost, that mandates weren't the answer. And we actually listened to the science, especially with kids in masks and kids in schools. What happened and is still happening to our children over the last 2 years is unconscionable. Learning loss, isolation, anxiety, depression. In so many states, our kids have been left behind, and so many will never catch up. That's why Iowa was the first state in the nation to require that schools open their doors. I was attacked by the left, I was attacked by the media, but it wasn't a hard choice. It was the right choice. And keeping schools open is only the start of the pro-parent, pro-family revolution that Republicans are leading in Iowa and states across this country. Republicans believe that parents matter. It was true before the pandemic, and it has never been more important to say out loud. Parents matter. They have a right to know and to have a say in what their kids are being taught. Families also have every right to live in a safe and a secure community, and that begins with a safe and secure country. But the Biden administration has refused to secure our border. They've refused to provide the resources to stop human trafficking, to stop the staggering influx of deadly drugs coming into our neighborhoods. They've refused to protect you. With Texas and Arizona leading the way, I, along with Republican governors from several states, have sent resources to the border. And we've actually gone to the border, something that our president and vice president have yet to do since taking office. On the economy, the contrast couldn't be more stark. While Democrats in D.C. are spending trillions, sending inflation soaring, Republican leaders around the country are balancing budgets and cutting taxes because we know that money spent on Main Street is better than money spent on bureaucracy. Today, I signed legislation that eliminates Iowa's tax on retirement income and sets our tax rate at 3.9%. That's less than half of what it was just 4 years ago. And it shouldn't come as a surprise that out of the top 20 states with the lowest unemployment rates, 17 have Republican governors. Republicans may not have the White House, but we're doing what we can to fill the leadership vacuum. And on the issues that are affecting Americans, Republicans are leading. We're standing up for parents and kids. We're standing up for life. We're keeping our communities safe and thanking those in uniform. We're fighting to restore America's energy independence, and that includes biofuels. We're getting people back to work, not paying them to stay home. Most of all, we're respecting your freedom. Behind me stands Iowa's Capitol, where we display our state motto, our liberties we prize and our rights we will maintain. And those aren't just empty words. It's a belief that the greatness of this state and this country lies in our people, not government. You shouldn't have to wake up every morning and worry about the next thing the government is going to do to you, your business, or your children. If we as elected leaders are doing our job, then the government is working well, but operating in the background. It's supporting the ingenuity and spirit of our people, not drowning them out. It's keeping them safe, not restricting their freedom. That's what I believe, that's what Republicans believe, and that's what Republicans are doing. I am so blessed to be the governor of Iowa, where people are humble, hardworking, and patriotic. We take care of each other. And yes, we are, as they say, Iowa nice. But you don't have to be from Iowa to see that those are the values of America at its best. All of America. Over the last few years, I've put my faith in Iowans, and they haven't let me down. I encourage this president to do the same, to put his faith in you, the American people, who have never wavered in your belief in this country, regardless of who leads it. Because you know, you've shown that the soul of America isn't about who lives in the White House. It's men and women like you in every corner of this nation who are willing to step up and take responsibility for your communities, for your neighbors, and ultimately for yourselves. By that most important measure at least, the state of our union is indeed strong. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.
All right, it's the economy, stupid. That's not exactly what she had to say, but she kind of invoked the legendary phrase, it's the economy, stupid, from James Carville. That is what you win elections on. That's what you run for. Kitchen table issues, the things that matter to people, inflation, gas prices. How much is it going to cost to put the food on your table? Republicans win a lot of elections by running on themes like that. No big surprise there to see Kim Reynolds, the governor of Iowa, perhaps invoking her inner James Carville, dare I say, also taking in more than a few swipes at the coastal elites in Democratic-controlled states like California and New York. We don't want your policies here in Iowa. That's what she had to say. And listen, that is who that message was for. It is for Americans like that who feel along those lines. So no big surprise to see the GOP prioritizing those themes in their direct response to the president and what he had to say on Capitol Hill. That, of course, Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds. With her response moments ago, I'm going to bring back in Megan Pratt, speaking of elections and kitchen table issues and things that matter to voters. What stood out to you, either in the president's remarks or really the GOP response we heard moments ago there, Megan?
Well, think about the contrast between the president and Governor Reynolds. Governor Reynolds brought up things that have been very successful and, frankly, major issues for voters in recent elections. We haven't had a lot to go on, right? 2021, not a big election year. But if you look at Virginia, the gubernatorial race that they had and the control of their lower house went to Republicans because of issues like Governor Reynolds talked about. She talked about education. She talked about racism. She talked about the ability for parents to decide what their children are going to learn. She talked about reopening schools. There's certainly a understanding among Republican sort of advisors, Republican strategists, that this messaging really works with parents, right? And parents are big voters. They make the time to vote. They take their kids with them to vote. It's all about setting them up to understand that the Republican Party wants to give them the most opportunity, right? And that's very different from what we heard from President Biden. He didn't talk about critical race theory or education outside of mentioning that his wife, Dr. Jill Biden, is a teacher in a community college full time. I think that is very different. And that really is the major difference between the messaging strategies of these two parties, very much on display tonight. And I think, JD, that is the biggest thing, is understanding where these two parties diverge, which is pretty much everywhere except Ukraine.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Okay, that's Megan Pratt there for us in the capital of the Lone Star State. We will check back in with my friend Megan in just a bit. I'm going to toss things over to Ariel Hickson. Speaking of my good friend, she is standing by with a member of Congress for ongoing reaction to the historic night here in D.C. Ariel, take it away.
Absolutely. I'm standing by with Congresswoman Williams. What was your reaction to the speech? What were your thoughts?
So, I could not be more proud of our president and the job that we've done for the American people over the last year. Things that stand out in my mind as a working mom. I have a 6-year-old son who today was his very first day that he was able to not wear a mask to school and in Atlanta public schools, and just the work that we've done over the past year with the American Rescue Plan by this administration to get shots in arms, to get our children in school safely. And then the entire body was able to attend the State of the Union tonight. Just a year ago, as a member of Congress, I wasn't even allowed in the chamber for the joint address. And so we've come so far in the last year, and just so much more work to be done as we continue to invest in a better America for everyone, and that starts with getting us out of this pandemic. We can see light at the end of the tunnel. Jobs are coming back, but we're going to have to make some investments, like in childcare. And the president recommitted himself to investing in childcare in this country so that women can get back into the workforce. That is so critical. So many things that are highlighted in the top of my mind. Funding for HBCUs and the investments that we need to do. My virtual State of the Union guest was Dr. Valerie Montgomery Rice of Morehouse School of Medicine, and they were on the front lines of making sure that the trials for the vaccine were equitable and that we had communities of color represented. And so to hear the president recommit to those investments means everything, especially when we're talking about the cancer moonshot. How do we make sure that cancer is no longer a death sentence in this country? Those things are going to take investments, and we have to make sure that we're investing in the research at our HBCUs.
And you are a representative from the state of Georgia, and of course, Georgia, that's the state right there. And everyone has been talking about these restrictive voting rights and voting laws that have really really kind of shaken up everything. Of course, as we're getting closer and closer to midterms, what was your take on the president touching on that subject? And of course, what's your take on the big Senate race that's going on right now? There's so much that is just really going on in your state. Can you just fill us in?
Georgia continues to be the center of the political universe, and I was probably the first and the loudest person on my feet when the president started talking about voting rights and what we have to do. The House has done its job. We've passed the Freedom to Vote Act. I sit in the seat that was held by Congressman John Lewis, and so I have a special commitment to this work to make sure that we have free and fair elections for everyone in this country. But we have had the full weight of the White House behind us. It's time for the Senate to do their job. But let's be clear, this is never about one election. We have a big election coming up in Georgia this year with our governor on the ballot. Stacey Abrams is running for governor. Senator Warnock is up for re-election. But this isn't about just one election. This is about the foundations of our democracy. And so if we don't get it done right now, we're going to continue to push. I'm a daughter of the civil rights movement, so I understand that this isn't the fight for a day or a month or a year. This is the continuous fight of a lifetime to make sure that we secure free and fair elections for everyone in this country.
And speaking about the fight for a lifetime, right now those primaries are going on right in Texas, where you have seen some of that push for restrictive voting laws right there. So we're really going to see the impact of that going forward. What is your kind of insight on that? How are you looking into and watching what's going on in Texas to see how that might mirror what may happen in your state?
So it's unfortunate that we are having to organize our way out of voter suppression, but this is the hand that we've been dealt, and we're willing to do the work. I'm not giving up on making sure that everyone is educated on the changes in the law, what new provisions there are, making sure that people get the tools that they need to make sure that they can cast their ballot, and once they cast it, that vote counts. I was just named the first ever voter protection chair of the DCCC, and so we are investing. Right now we have $30 million committed to making sure that we invest in educating people on changes in voting laws across the country, and we are going to continue to build upon that to make sure that people have the resources that they need to cast the ballot and that ballot counts once it's passed.
You know, education is always the first step. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us today. You know what, JD, we're going to have to toss it back to you.
Ariel Hickson standing by with Representative Williams there of Georgia. Thank you so much. I am going to bring in my friend Baker Machado. He's there in New York. Baker, since you and I last spoke, which is just a few minutes ago, a lot has happened, and we've had a lot of different lawmakers here on our airwaves. What are your pervading thoughts here at 10:54 at night?
Look, JD, the biggest thing that President Biden needed to do tonight was reset the Biden agenda and reset basically the momentum for his administration moving forward. COVID basically now in the rearview mirror here for the president. So does the president, with his very low approval ratings right now, get a bounce after this speech? Also, as Megan correctly pointed out from Ken Reynolds' speech earlier tonight from Republicans, that's going to be the playbook you're going to see against Democrats heading into this midterm election, which is just 252 days away. Republicans feel like, based off of polls, that they feel like they're comfortable based off of rising crime, border security, inflation, Afghanistan, and then even her sort of, without even mentioning AOC and Gavin Newsom, her shady remarks about those two individuals, Gavin Newsom in particular, going to the French Laundry restaurant in California during COVID. That is something you're going to see Republicans really hit Democrats a lot heading into the midterm elections here, JD. So I think that was really important to sort of highlight here.
Yeah, I know more than a few people had fun with her. Politicians escaping for sun and fun type of comment. To be like, is that a swipe at AOC, or also, not to be in whataboutism, but like stares in Ted Cruz a little bit? What are we doing here with a line like that? Okay, let me bring in Megan Pratt there for us in Texas. Megan, what is top of mind for you here at this hour, my friend, either with regards to Representative Williams, Governor Reynolds, all the above?
I love what Baker just said, JD, about this being a reset button, right? I love a good reset button. You know, they use them in politics all the time. But Biden has really struggled to pull out of his low approval, even when, and you'll be shocked that this was really just a splash in the pan, but even when the U.S. took out the top leader of ISIS, that was a story for like 2 seconds, and then we all moved on. He did not get the same sort of bump in approval that you typically see out after that kind of mission, because things are still challenging for the American people. And the things that are going well are macro things, right? Like record job growth. That's cool and all, but like, what about my job and my wages and my ability to feed my family? Pocketbook issues matter to people. Republicans think that they have sort of an ahead on this, and I think that is the main difference between what Biden said and what Governor Reynolds said.
Absolutely. Thank you, Megan. Ariel Hickson there for us on Capitol Hill. Ariel, what is on the top of your mind as we wind down our broadcast this evening?
You know what? What's on top of my mind is the thought process that we talked to two different lawmakers from two different backgrounds, one Republican, one Democrat. And although they heard the same speech, there was still this thought process of hope. That's something that I did not expect to hear from both sides. And I think that's because everyone's really crossing their fingers at this point. We've been through such a tough year, a tough 2 years with COVID, Ukraine, all the above. I think everyone is really hoping for change in the future.
All right, Ariel Hickson there for us on Capitol Hill. Megan Pratt's there for us in Austin. Baker Machado in New York. We didn't even get to the most viral moments of the night, like Chuck Schumer standing and clapping with no one around him, and of course Justice Breyer being so overwhelmed at the attention that we'll have to leave that for tomorrow morning's coverage. Thank you. He loved it. It was a wholesome moment. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us this evening for the special State of the Union edition of None of the Above. Be a force for good in the world, my friends. Until we meet again, have a great night. We will pick up coverage first thing tomorrow morning here on Cheddar News.
The most extraordinary aspect of New York is its unrivaled network of infrastructure systems working to keep the city breathing. Systems that can process 12,000 tons of trash.
You need us to clean your community. Without us, things won't be too pretty.
Treat 1.3 billion gallons